Section 1. The Show Beneath the Show. An Introduction. There is a particular kind of comfort that comes from returning to something you already know. Not the comfort of surprise, not the thrill of not knowing what comes next, but the deeper, quieter comfort of familiarity, of sitting down with something that has been with you so long it has started to feel like memory itself, like the smell of a house you grew up in, like the sound of a voice that belonged to someone who loved you, like the warm glow of a television in a dark room when the rest of the world has gone still, and you are finally, mercifully allowed to just stop. That is what The Simpsons is for so many people. It is not simply a television program, it is not simply a cartoon. For an enormous number of people, people who are now adults with their own lives, their own worries, their own quiet sadnesses, The Simpsons is the texture of childhood itself. It is the background noise of 1,000 Sunday evenings. It is the show that was always on, always there, always reliable. The theme song alone is enough to send millions of people backwards in time, back to a living room, back to a couch, back to a version of themselves a couch, back to a version of themselves that had not yet learned how complicated everything was going to become. And so there is something deeply comforting about returning to it now. In the dark, in the quiet, when the day has finally ended and you are finally allowed to rest. But here is what we are going to do tonight, or this morning, or whenever it is that you have found your way here, to this voice, to this particular corner of the quiet. We are not simply going to remember the funny parts. We are going to do something a little different. We are going to look, carefully and slowly and without hurry, at the other parts. The parts that existed alongside all the laughter. The parts that the writers buried just deep enough that children could miss them entirely, but that adults, or children who grew into adults, could find later and recognize with a shock of something that felt almost like grief. Because here's the truth about The Simpsons that takes years to fully understand. It was always two shows at once. On the surface, it was a comedy. A bright yellow family in a bright yellow town doing absurd, impossible, hilarious things. Homer falling downstairs. Bart writing on chalkboards. A cat and a dog that were always getting into trouble. Springfield, that perfectly imagined American nowhere with its nuclear plant and its quick E-Mart and its Moe's Tavern and its eternal, comfortable sameness. But underneath that surface, and sometimes not even that far underneath, sometimes right there at the surface itself, barely disguised, was something else entirely. A show about loneliness, about failure, about the specific exhaustion of being a person who wanted more than life was willing to give, about marriages that were held together by love and stubbornness and nothing else, about children who felt things too deeply and had no language for what they were feeling, about a town full of people who were doing their absolute best and finding again and again that their best was not quite enough. The Simpsons, at its greatest, was one of the most emotionally honest pieces of popular art ever made, and it achieved that honesty through a paradox. By making everything a joke, it earned the right to say true things. By hiding the sadness inside the comedy, it could reach people who would have switched off anything that came to them as openly sad. It could get inside you while you were laughing and leave something there, a feeling, a recognition, a small ache, that you would carry with you long after the episode ended. That is what we are going to explore tonight, not with urgency, not with the sharp, alert energy of analysis. We are going to move through it slowly, the way you move through a quiet house at night. Gently, noticing things, pausing where it feels right to pause. The world outside is doing whatever it is doing, the traffic and the news and the endless noise of everything, and none of that needs to reach us here. Here we have time. Here we can afford to be slow. Let's begin at the beginning. Not the very beginning of the show, the pilot, the first rough episodes, but the beginning of what made the show matter. And that beginning, in many ways, is a single image. A couch, a television, a family. Homer Simpson is not a smart man. This is something the show established early and returned to constantly, and it is, on the surface, the engine of most of the comedy. Homer doesn't understand things. Homer makes mistakes. Homer acts before thinking, eats before considering, speaks before knowing what he is going to say. He is, in the comedic tradition, the fool, the lovable buffoon, the big soft man who means well and causes chaos. But watch the show for long enough, and something else starts to come through. Homer Simpson is a man who has failed, early and repeatedly, by almost every institution and relationship that was supposed to hold him. His mother left when he was a child, walked away one night and never came back, leaving him with a father who was present in body but often absent in spirit. A man who expressed love through mild disappointment and well-intentioned neglect. Homer grew up without the emotional scaffolding that children need. He grew up learning to cope with hurt by ignoring it, to process confusion by eating something, to manage loneliness by making himself into a spectacle so at least people would look. And then he grew up, and he got a job that was beneath him, and he had a family he loved with his whole enormous heart. And he stood at the kitchen window sometimes and looked out at a yard he couldn't quite afford to maintain, and felt something he didn't have words for. Something vast and dull and persistent, like a weather system that never quite moved on. The show never named this feeling. It didn't need to. Anyone who has ever stood at a window and felt the weight of a life that was both completely ordinary and somehow exactly what they'd feared, they knew. They recognized it. They felt it in their own chest and were startled to find it coming out of a cartoon. That is the miracle of The Simpsons, and it is what we are going to sit with tonight. The writers of the show, particularly in those early golden seasons, the ones that people talk about when they talk about the show at its best, were working from something real. They were working from the texture of American life, specifically American working-class life, in all its warmth and its exhaustion and its specific kind of desperation that doesn't announce itself because it is too tired to announce anything. They were working from their own memories of childhoods that were complicated, of parents who tried hard and sometimes missed, of the particular ache of wanting something more and not knowing exactly what that something was. And they put all of that into a yellow family in a yellow town in a show that was technically a cartoon for children. They hit it well. They had to. The comedy was real. It wasn't a cover. It wasn't a disguise in the contemptuous sense. The jokes were genuinely funny. The absurdity was genuinely playful. But the sadness was also genuinely there. And the remarkable thing, the thing that made the show into something that has lasted now for decades and will outlast most things made in the same era, is that neither the comedy nor the sadness undermined the other. They coexisted. They needed each other. The show was funny because it was honest, and it was bearable because it was funny. We are going to move through that tonight. Through the moments that were too honest, too dark, too real to sit comfortably inside the cartoon brightness. Through the episodes that made you laugh, and then, later, alone, made you feel something you couldn't quite name. Through the scenes where a character said something or did something or simply looked a certain way, and the light of the show shifted just for a moment and you saw what was underneath. We are going to do this slowly. There is nowhere to be. The night is long or the early morning is quiet, and you are here and you are comfortable and you are allowed to let your eyes close whenever they want to. None of this requires your full attention. All of this is just a voice in the dark moving through something worth remembering. The Simpsons began as a set of short animated segments on The Tracy Ullman Show in 1987. They were rough, angular, awkward. The family barely resembled what they would become. But even then, something was present. A warmth. A specific quality of attention toward ordinary American life that felt different from the way most television looked at the same material. Most sitcoms, even the good ones, treated working-class life as a setup. The Simpsons treated it as a subject. When the show got its own series in 1989, it exploded. Nothing had quite prepared audiences for what it was. It was too fast, too irreverent, too willing to mock the very medium it existed in. Bart Simpson became a cultural phenomenon. The bad boy, the troublemaker, the kid on a million t-shirts. For a while, he was the whole show, or at least that was how the world outside saw it. Bart was the id of the thing, the rebellion, the chaos. But the show's creators knew from early on that Bart was not the heart of it. Homer was. And Homer was something much more complicated than a rebellious 10-year-old. Homer was the show's relationship with time. With regret. With the specific sadness of a man who had passed the point where his life could have gone differently and was now just living it day by day, trying to find enough joy to keep going. That is where we begin. That is the foundation of everything we will talk about tonight. a man in a yellow house in a fictional town who carries, in his enormous cartoon body, something recognizable and real and deeply, quietly aching. The night is long. The voice will stay with you. Let your breath slow and your body settle, and let's walk together through the dark heart of the most beloved cartoon ever made. If you're watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, drop a comment and tell us. What time is it where you are? What city, what country, what small corner of the world has you settling in for this? There is something beautiful about knowing that people all over the planet are watching the same thing in the dark, each in their own quiet, each finding their own kind of rest. And if this is the kind of thing that helps you sleep, if a slow voice and something worth thinking about is what you need at the end of the day, then subscribe so you never have to go looking for it. It will just be there, waiting whenever you need it. Section 2. Homer Simpson. The man who was built to break. There is a moment in an episode from the 4th season, one of those seasons that fans return to again and again as evidence of what the show could be, where Homer Simpson stands alone in his kitchen in the middle of the night. He is not doing anything dramatic. He is not in crisis, not in the middle of one of the show's elaborate comedic set pieces. He is simply standing there in the dark in his house, and the expression on his face is the expression of a man who has briefly stepped outside his own life and is looking at it from a distance, and what he sees is not bad exactly, not wrong, but something. Something that sits in the chest and does not move. The moment lasts only a few seconds. Then a sound from upstairs, or the refrigerator hum, or something else ordinary breaks the spell, and Homer's face rearranges itself into something more familiar, and the comedy resumes, and the moment passes. But it doesn't disappear. It stays with you. Because in those few seconds, the show did something remarkable. It let Homer be real. Fully, uncomplicatedly, undeniably real. Not as a joke, not as a setup to something funny, but as a person. A person with an interior life. A person who sometimes stood in the dark and felt the weight of things. Homer J. Simpson is, on the surface, one of the most exhaustively documented characters in television history. We know everything about him. We know he works at the Springfield nuclear power plant as a safety inspector, a job he got largely by accident and has kept largely through luck. We know he loves donuts with an almost spiritual devotion. We know he strangles his son and bowls badly and watches football and says, "Dough." We know the outline of him perfectly, but the outline is not the man. The man is in the spaces between the familiar jokes. And in those spaces, if you look carefully, you find something worth sitting with for a long time. Homer Simpson's defining wound is abandonment. This is not stated outright in most episodes. The show is too careful and too smart for that kind of naked declaration. But it runs underneath everything, a low, persistent note beneath all the comedy. His mother, Mona Simpson, left when he was a child. She had her reasons. She was a political activist running from the law. Her disappearance was not malice, but necessity. And the show, when it finally addressed all of this in the episode where she returns, is generous to her. But generosity to the mother does not undo the damage to the child. Homer grew up without her. Homer grew up with a father who loved him in the only ways Abe Simpson knew how to love someone, which were not always the ways Homer needed. And so Homer became a man who reaches, who grasps, who attaches himself to things, to food, to television, to his family, to new enthusiasms that burn bright and then fade, with an intensity that looks from the outside like simple greed or simple stupidity, but is, if you look more carefully, something more like hunger. A hunger that was installed early, when the person who was supposed to stay didn't stay, and that never entirely went away. The HOMR episode. The one where Homer discovers that as a child he pushed a crayon up his nose and into his brain, and that this crayon has been suppressing his intelligence ever since, is one of the darkest and most beautiful things the show ever did. When the crayon is removed, Homer becomes genuinely intelligent. Not Simpson's intelligence, not the occasional flash of insight the show gave him for comic effect, but actually measurably, verifiably smart. He can read literature and understand it. He can think through problems. He can engage with the world in ways that were always available to him, but sealed off. and it destroys him. Not because intelligence is bad, but because Homer's intelligence, freed from the dulling crayon, immediately begins doing what intelligence does when it is finally allowed to function in a life that was built for a less intelligent person. It shows him everything he has and everything he has missed, and holds both of those things in his mind simultaneously, and the gap between them is devastating. He loses his friends because his humor has changed, and his interests have changed, and the familiar, comfortable stupidity that people loved is no longer there. He gains a connection with Lisa, a real one, finally, the kind of connection she has always wanted with her father. And that is beautiful, and he can feel how beautiful it is. But he also, in his new clarity, begins to understand how much of his life has been a kind of long, soft, comfortable failure. How many doors closed? How many chances passed? How much of what he is was always going to be shaped by what was done to him before he was old enough to choose anything? The episode ends with Homer reinserting the crayon. He does it deliberately. He makes the choice. And the way the show frames this, not as comedy, not as a joke, but as something genuinely sorrowful, is one of the bravest things a mainstream cartoon has ever attempted. Because Homer is not choosing stupidity because he is too dumb to choose otherwise. He is choosing it because the pain of being smart is more than he can carry. Because the life he has, the imperfect, lovable, messy, funny life, is bearable in a way that the life he can see but never fully reach is not. Because sometimes people choose the comfortable version of themselves, not out of weakness, but out of a kind of love. Love for the life they have. Love for the people around them. Love for the self that exists rather than the self that might have been. He writes Lisa a note before reinserting the crayon. He tells her he loves her. He tells her she is extraordinary. He tells her things that the less intelligent Homer will not be able to articulate, but that the intelligent Homer can see clearly and wants her to know. And then he undoes himself. If you have ever made a choice that was less than what you were capable of, not out of laziness, not out of failure, but out of a kind of protective mercy toward yourself and the people you love, then you understand Homer's choice. You understand it in your body, in the quiet, heavy place where the hardest truths live. The Frank Grimes episode, formerly titled Homer's Enemy, is perhaps the darkest thing the show ever attempted within its main continuity. It introduced a character, Frank Grimes, a man who had worked extremely hard his entire life and achieved modest success through grinding, earnest, perpetual effort, and placed him alongside Homer, and let the collision play out to its logical conclusion. Frank Grimes cannot understand Homer. This is the premise, and it is funny, and the show plays it for comedy. But underneath the comedy is something genuinely unsettling. Homer Simpson, who is lazy and lucky and oblivious, who has stumbled into a life that Frank Grimes has denied himself through sheer discipline, is presented not as an aspirational figure, but as evidence of something wrong with the world. The universe of The Simpsons, which is warm and comedic and safe, is revealed. Just for this one episode, just for the duration of Frank Grimes' stay, to be deeply, randomly unfair. Frank Grimes cannot make Homer understand this. Homer doesn't understand it because Homer doesn't think in those terms. Homer is not aware of how lucky he is, Maya, not in the obtuse, satirical way that sitcom characters are sometimes unaware of their privilege, but in a deeper way, a way that suggests Homer has never been capable of the kind of self-reflection that would make him aware of anything at all. He is kind to Grimes in his way. He means well. He genuinely cannot see what he is doing. Frank Grimes goes mad and dies. Not metaphorically, actually, in the episode, driven to a kind of furious breakdown by the injustice of Homer's existence, he electrocutes himself. And at the funeral, Homer falls asleep and starts talking in his sleep, saying something funny, and the other mourners laugh. The episode ends on that laugh. The world does not stop. The injustice does not resolve. Frank Grimes, who worked hard and deserved more, is in the ground. And Homer Simpson, who did not deserve more but received it anyway, is snoring in the front pew. It is one of the most nihilistic endings in the history of American network television. It is disguised as a joke, but it is not a joke. It is the show looking directly at something true and terrible about the way the world distributes its rewards and saying, yes, this is how it is. We are not going to comfort you. And yet, And this is the genius of the show, the thing that keeps it from becoming simply bleak. Even in the Frank Grimes episode, Homer's essential lovability is intact. He is not a villain. He is not the cause of the injustice. He is simply a beneficiary of it, the way most people are beneficiaries of systems and circumstances they did not design and do not control. The show does not ask us to hate Homer. It asks us to hold both things at once, to love Homer and to see what loving Homer costs Frank Grimes. To understand that kindness and unfairness can exist in the same person, in the same life, in the same yellow house on the same safe street. Homer's relationship with his father, Abraham Simpson, is one of the longest-running emotional threads in the series. Abe is a figure of comedy, an old man who tells rambling, incoherent stories, who lives in a retirement home that Homer visits too infrequently, who belongs to a generation that expressed love through silence and showed up through mere presence rather than words or touch. But there are episodes, quiet ones, easy to overlook, where the relationship between these two men opens up into something genuinely moving, where you see Homer wanting his father to see him, and Abe wanting to reach his son, and the gap between them, the gap of generation and communication style and buried hurt and misunderstood love, staying stubbornly present despite both of them wanting it to close. There is an episode where Homer imagines what his life would have been like if he had made different choices, if he had stayed with his first girlfriend rather than marrying Marge. The alternate life is, in some ways, better, more financially successful, more intellectually stimulating. And Homer, in this alternate life, is not happier exactly, but different. A different kind of person. A person who could have been, but wasn't. The episode ends by affirming Marge, affirming the choice Homer made, affirming the family and the couch and the ordinary life. And it means it. The affirmation is real, not ironic. But the alternate Homer lingers in the mind, the ghost of a road not taken. The shape of a life that existed as possibility and then didn't. The show understands that loving your life and mourning what your life isn't are not mutually exclusive. It never asks you to choose between them. It just holds them together, the way actual life holds them together. In the same heart, in the same chest, in the same man standing at a kitchen window in the dark, with an expression that doesn't have a name. Homer's relationship with his mother, when it was finally fully explored, was one of the show's most genuinely devastating storylines. Mona Simpson, played by Glenn Close in her most prominent appearance, returns to Homer's life after decades away. She comes back older, apologetic, full of the love she was never able to give. And Homer, who has spent his whole life with a mother-shaped hole in the middle of himself, has to figure out what to do with her. The episode plays the reunion with care. It doesn't romanticize it. It lets Homer be angry, lets him push her away, lets him do the very human thing of rejecting what he has always wanted because the wanting has been going on too long and the arrival feels wrong, feels like a violation of the sadness that has become familiar. Grief can be a home. Homer has lived in his grief for his mother for so long that her actual presence destabilizes him. And then they reconcile, they find their way toward each other. They are given, briefly, the thing they were both denied. And then she dies. She dies in Homer's arms in the middle of the night, and Homer holds her, and the show doesn't look away. It stays in that moment, in the dark, in the weight of it. And Homer, who has carried this absence his whole life, is now carrying its opposite, the presence that arrived too late, that lasted too briefly, that ended just as he had finally allowed himself to believe it was real. He stands at her grave and says something. The show lets him say it quietly, and the camera stays on his face, and there is nothing funny about it. And the show doesn't try to make it funny. Some wounds, the show seems to say, are just wounds. And some moments of loss are just loss. And sometimes, in the middle of a comedy about a yellow cartoon family, that is what you are given, and you are meant to feel it. And there is nothing to do but feel it. Homer is, at his core, a study in a very specific kind of American hope. The hope that love is enough. That if you love your family hard enough, loudly enough, messily enough, the gaps and the failures and the missed moments will be covered. That the couch and the television and the daily return home will add up to something that counts, something real, something that justifies the whole complicated project of being a person. Sometimes the show suggests he is right. Sometimes it is gentler, more forgiving, more willing to let the love win. But in its darker moments, it shows the gaps, the crayon in the brain, the mother at the grave, the old man in the retirement home, the Frank Grimes at the funeral. And it holds all of it, the love and the damage, the warmth and the loss, in the same enormous, exhausted, earnest yellow hands. Section 3. Marge's silent suffering. The woman who held everything together. There is a version of Marge Simpson that is easy to dismiss. She is the nag, the worrier, the voice of reason that exists primarily to be ignored by the funnier, louder people around her. She is the one who says no, who raises the eyebrows, who makes the disapproving sound, who worries while everyone else acts. In the broad comedic structure of the show, she is the responsible center around which the chaos orbits, present mostly to be contrasted with the chaos, to define it by not participating in it. That version of Marge is real. It exists in the show. But it is not all of Marge, and in many ways it is not even most of Marge. And the episodes that crack her open, that go past the blue hair and the familiar silhouette and the comforting routine of her presence, are some of the most unsettling and honest things The Simpsons ever produced. Marge Simpson is a woman in an impossible position, and the show knew it, and occasionally it stopped out being polite about it. Let's start with an early episode, one that aired in the second season and established something about Marge that the show would return to for years. The episode where Lisa is depressed, genuinely and clinically depressed, and Marge cannot reach her. The episode is called Moaning Lisa, and it begins with Lisa waking up one morning in the grip of a sadness she cannot explain. Not a sadness that has a cause, not a sadness that came from something that happened. Just a sadness, a gray, persistent thing. A weather system of the soul that arrived without invitation and shows no sign of leaving. She plays her saxophone mournfully. She drags through school. She feels in the precise way that depression actually feels, that the world is full of pain and she is too much in contact with it, and there is nowhere to hide. Marge's response to this, initially, is the response of a mother who loves her daughter and is terrified of what her daughter is feeling. She tells Lisa to smile. She tells her that smiling makes things better. She coaches her through the mechanics of false cheerfulness with the best of intentions and the most loving of hearts. But one morning, watching Lisa put on the coached smile and send herself out into the world wearing a face that doesn't belong to her, Marge stops. She calls Lisa back. She tells her something remarkable. She tells her, "I was wrong. Don't smile if you don't feel it. Be sad if you're sad. Your feelings belong to you, and you don't owe anyone a performance of feelings you don't have." It is a small moment, lasting perhaps 30 seconds. But it is a moment in which a cartoon mother says something genuinely wise and genuinely true about emotional authenticity, about the damage done by teaching children, and especially girls, especially women, to perform happiness for the comfort of others. And then the show moves on, and the comedy resumes, and Marge goes back to being the worrier at the center of things. But she said it, and it stays. What makes the moment so resonant and so quietly dark is what it implies about Marge herself. She knows to say this to Lisa because she learned it the hard way. She knows what it is to smile when you don't feel like smiling. She knows what it is to perform contentment for the people around you because their comfort is more important, or at least more immediate, than your own honesty. She knows it so well that she can recognize it in her daughter's face from across the kitchen. Marge Bouvier grew up in a household defined by her mother's anxieties and her father's distance. She was the middle child, overlooked, present primarily as a helper. She learned early that her role was supportive and her feelings were secondary. She was, in the terminology of a certain kind of psychological observation, a parentified child. Someone who was trained very young to organize herself around the needs of others rather than around her own. And she grew up and married Homer, which was in many ways the most authentic choice of her life, a genuine love story built on genuine attraction and genuine affection. But she also married the most demanding possible person in terms of emotional labor. Homer requires constant management. Homer's feelings spill out and flood rooms and need to be processed and redirected and soothed. Homer's crises are large and loud and present. Homer, for all his lovability, is a man whose emotional needs have always been more visible than Marge's, because Marge has always made sure hers stayed invisible. This is what the episode A Streetcar Named Marge is actually about. On the surface, it is a comedy episode in which Marge joins a local production of a musical version of A Streetcar Named Desire and discovers she has real acting talent. The comedy comes from the staging, from the other characters, from the absurdity of a musical version of Tennessee Williams in Springfield. But what Marge discovers in the process of playing Blanche DuBois, a woman trapped in a world that doesn't see her, dependent on the kindness of strangers because she has burned through the kindness of everyone who was supposed to be there for her, is that she has feelings she has not been allowing herself to feel. Anger, specifically. The specific anger of a person who has been supporting and accommodating and managing for a very long time and has never quite allowed themselves to be supported in return. In the play, she gets to feel it. She gets to perform it, which is a kind of permission she wouldn't otherwise give herself. And the performance is riveting, and everyone can see it. And Homer is in the audience watching his wife be fully, vibrantly, cathartically alive. And he is moved by it, and for a moment, he understands something about her that he does not usually understand. The moment passes, the show moves on. But the implication remains. Marge's most authentic self, the self that has real feelings and real anger and real desires, is most visible when she is pretending to be someone else. In her actual life, in her actual kitchen, in her actual marriage, that self stays carefully managed. That is a dark thing to say about a person. The show says it in the middle of a comedy, wrapped in songs and jokes and the warm Springfield light. But it says it. The gambling episode, the one where Marge develops a gambling addiction while Homer is away, is one of the most compassionate and most unflinching treatments of addiction in the show's run. Marge, who is careful and controlled and responsible in all things, discovers at a casino that the act of gambling, the precise chemical thrill of it, the way it colonizes the brain's reward system and makes everything else feel gray by comparison, gets inside her in a way she cannot manage. The episode does not play this for judgment. It does not make Marge ridiculous or pathetic. It shows her, with genuine care, in the grip of something she did not choose and cannot simply decide her way out of. It shows addiction as it actually is, not as a moral failure, but as a thing that happens to people, that uses the brain's own machinery against it, that can happen to the most controlled and careful person just as easily as to the most reckless. And it shows what addiction costs: the children not picked up from school, the meals not made, the Homer who comes home to find his wife gone. Not physically gone, but gone in the way that addiction takes people, present in body and absent in every other way. The episode resolves, in the way that TV episodes must resolve in 20 minutes, with Marge acknowledging the problem and committing to addressing it. But the resolution is careful not to be triumphant. Recovery is not a moment. The show knows this. Marge's acknowledgement is the beginning, not the end. And the lingering question, why? Why Marge? Why does the most controlled person in the family find this particular release valve? The show leaves open because the show understands that the answer is right there in everything we know about who she is. Marge does not have many outlets. She is the container for other people's emotions, the manager of the household, the person whose own needs are perpetually secondary. The gambling is not random. It is the first thing she has found that is entirely hers, that doesn't require her to take care of anyone, that gives her something without demanding she give anything back. That this thing is destructive is the tragedy. That she found it at all, that something in her was looking for it, is the deeper sadness. There is an episode where Marge gets a job, really gets a job, a proper career outside the home, working as a real estate agent. And she is good at it, extremely good at it, in the way that people who have been applying their intelligence and drive to invisible domestic labor for years are often devastatingly good the moment they are put in front of a task the world recognizes as work. And the episode, which could have been simply triumphant, Marge discovers her professional self, everyone cheers, instead does something more honest. It shows the cost. The dinner not made. The children slightly adrift. Homer trying to take on domestic responsibilities and failing in ways that are funny, but also revealing. Because the work Marge does is genuinely hard, genuinely skilled, genuinely important. And the fact that it became visible only when she stopped doing it is its own kind of statement. The episode ends with Marge pulling back from the career, choosing family. And the show does not judge this choice. It respects it as genuine, as an authentic expression of what Marge values and who she is. But it also does not fully let it go. The career Marge was fleetingly visible in that episode. The competent, ambitious, bright-eyed professional Marge. And she chose not to be that person, or chose to be that person only partially, only invisibly, only in the spaces the family didn't need filled. That choice is hers. The show honors it, but it also mourns it quietly, in the way that the show mourns all the unlived lives of its characters. Not with drama, but with a kind of gentle, persistent attention to what was possible and what was chosen and the space that lives between those two things. Marge's relationship with her own mother is largely present in the background. The anxious Jacqueline Bouvier, the woman who taught Marge to worry, to manage, to hold herself carefully, to never let things get too messy. What is passed down through women and families like this is not simply behavior, but a whole orientation toward the self, a trained smallness, a habit of making room. Marge makes room. It is her great skill and her great cost. She makes room for Homer's chaos and Bart's energy and Lisa's feelings and Maggie's needs, and she is there, always there, in the middle of the kitchen, with her hair piled high and her eyes attentive, making room. The episodes that pull back and look at her, really look at her, that ask what Marge needs, what Marge wants, what Marge might have been, are the episodes that reveal the full weight of what it means to be the person everyone else depends on. Not heroically, not with trumpets, just honestly. It is heavy and it is lonely, and she carries it because she loves her family and because she does not know how not to, and both of those things are true at the same time. The fear of flying episode, where Marge is revealed to have severe aviophobia, is played partly for comedy. Marge in therapy, Marge's sessions revealing the roots of her anxiety. But it opens into something more interesting. The therapist who works with Marge is gentle and perceptive, and what she is gently and perceptively drawing out is not just a fear of airplanes, but a deeper anxiety about helplessness, about giving up control, about what happens when the thing you have organized your whole life around, the management, the control, the careful maintenance of everything, is suddenly taken away. Marge's fear of flying is not about planes. It is about what happens when you can't hold everything together. When the turbulence comes and there is nothing to do but sit in it and trust that you will be okay. That is the fear under all of Marge's fears. And the show names it gently in the middle of a comedy episode and then wraps it back up and moves on. But it named it, and it stays. Marge Simpson is, in the end, the kind of woman who has always existed and who has rarely been seen clearly by the popular culture that surrounds her. The woman who holds the center, who is indispensable and therefore invisible. Who does the work that keeps everything running and receives, for this work, the specific reward of having it be so consistent that it stops being noticed? The show saw her. Imperfectly, inconsistently. It was a network television show with 22 episodes a season, and not every episode was a meditation on the inner life of its female characters. But in the episodes where it stopped and looked, it saw her. It gave her complexity and pain and unglamorous humanity. It let her be sad and angry and frightened and funny and wonderful and deeply, consistently real. That is not nothing. In a landscape full of TV wives and TV mothers who existed primarily as furniture for the stories of their husbands and children, Marge Simpson was occasionally and beautifully a person. Section 4. Bart's Hidden Trauma. The kid who was never just a kid. Bart Simpson arrived in the cultural imagination as a symbol of something uncomplicated. He was the rebel, the underachiever, the kid who talked back, who skated through the neighborhood causing mayhem, who wore his dysfunction like a badge and dared you to tell him that wasn't enough. He was on the t-shirts and the lunchboxes and the Saturday morning conversations of a generation. Underachiever and proud of it, man. That was the phrase. That was the Bart that the world outside the show grabbed and held and merchandised into something enormous. But the Bart inside the show, the one who existed in the actual episodes, in the actual minutes of actual television, was always something more complicated. And in the episodes that cared most about him, he was something more uncomfortable. a child in genuine distress, doing what children in genuine distress almost always do, which is to perform confidence and nonchalance with everything he has. Because the alternative is to be seen, and being seen means being vulnerable, and being vulnerable means being hurt. Bart Simpson is one of the most psychologically sophisticated portraits of a troubled boy in the history of popular entertainment. He is not troubled in the melodramatic sense, not haunted, not traumatized in ways that the show would ever underline or announce. He is troubled in the ordinary, difficult, real way that children who feel too much and have too few outlets are troubled. He has too much energy and not enough direction. He is smarter than his grades suggest, more sensitive than his behavior implies, more frightened than his swagger would ever let you know. The episode that reveals this most nakedly is Bart Gets an F. It aired in the second season and is, by many measures, the most emotionally honest episode in the show's long history. It is certainly one of the episodes that people are most likely to name when they are asked about The Simpsons making them cry, because it does exactly that, in a way that is surprising and complete and undeniable. The setup is familiar to anyone who has ever struggled in school. Bart is failing. He is about to be held back, to repeat fourth grade, and for all his professed nonchalance, the reality of this has begun to get through. He tries to study. He actually, genuinely tries, not in his half-hearted, distracted way, but really tries. Sitting at his desk in the small hours of the night, doing the thing that does not come naturally to him, pushing himself. And he still fails the test. He is 1 point away from passing. 1 point. And he failed anyway. When he sees the grade, something happens to Bart that very rarely happens. He cries. He cries in front of Mrs. Krabappel, who has spent most of the series as an antagonist figure, a tired and embittered teacher who has long since stopped expecting anything from him. He cries and he cannot stop it, and he doesn't have the composure to hide it. He stands in the classroom and tears run down his yellow face and he says, genuinely, "I really tried. I really tried this time." And then, through his tears, he identifies one thing. One piece of historical trivia from the failed exam that he actually got right. Just one thing, but it is worth a bonus point, and the bonus point is enough. He passes. He runs outside into a freak snowstorm, and he stands in it and he cries and screams with relief. And the emotion is so large and so physical and so completely unlike anything we have seen from Bart before that it is almost disorienting. Because Bart doesn't cry. Bart doesn't admit to trying. Bart doesn't let himself be seen wanting something. The whole architecture of his personality is built against exactly this. Against the kind of vulnerability that requires wanting something and admitting you might not get it. And the episode earns this moment because it has been careful about showing you, in the preceding minutes, why Bart is the way he is. He is not simply a rebel by temperament. He is a child who has learned, through long experience, that effort and vulnerability are not reliable. That trying and failing in front of people is worse than not trying at all. Because at least not trying gives you a story. You could have done it if you wanted to. Trying and failing takes that story away. His performance in school is not laziness. It is armor. And the episode temporarily removes the armor and shows you what's underneath, which is a child who wants very much to succeed at something, and who has been hurt enough by not succeeding that he has built a whole identity around pretending not to want it. The episode Bart Sells His Soul is another one that the show cannot quite be accused of underplaying. In it, Bart, in an act of adolescent cynicism, sells his soul to Milhouse for $5, reasoning that souls are not real and therefore cannot matter, and therefore trading his is a transaction without meaningful cost. But the episode proceeds to show Bart experiencing something that functions exactly like the loss of a soul. A creeping wrongness, a disconnection, a sense that something essential is absent. He loses the ability to connect with animals. He loses his sense of humor in the specific bodily way that humor resides in a person. He looks at himself in mirrors and feels the absence. He eventually buys his soul back, and the episode ends with what appears to be a restoration. But the darkness of the premise, that a child could be cynical enough about metaphysics and meaning to sell away his own sense of self for $5, and that the show would then take this seriously enough to track the consequences, is not fully resolved by the resolution. The Bart who sells his soul is not simply joking. He is a child who has not been taught to value the inner life, who has been trained by his environment to privilege the material and the immediate, who is in the process of making the kind of mistake that children make when they have absorbed the wrong lessons. The episode does not lecture him, it just shows him what he loses, and then it gives it back. But the question it leaves, the question of how a child gets to a place where he would make that trade, stays open. And the answer, visible in the texture of Bart's life, is not reassuring. Bart's relationship with his father is one of the show's oldest and most carefully maintained dynamics. Homer loves Bart. This is not in question. The love is real and warm and physically present. Homer hugs his son, Homer cheers for his son, Homer shows up for his son in the ways that matter even when he falls short in the ways that also matter. But Homer also strangles Bart. This is played as a running gag. Homer's hands around Bart's neck, the familiar throttling, Bart's eyes bugging out, the domestic violence of it somehow diffused by its cartoonishness. And yet in context, in the reality of what the show is depicting, a father who responds to his child's provocations with physical force, even cartoonish force, is a father communicating something about power and anger that a child absorbs. The show is aware of this. In episodes that push against the gag, that make you look at it directly rather than past it, there is an acknowledgement of what this pattern means. Homer's anger is not malicious. It is reflexive. It comes from the same place as all of Homer's reactions, from a man who was not taught good emotional regulation and who is therefore at the mercy of his own feelings, whose love for his son and his frustration with his son exist in the same enormous, unmanaged emotional space. Bart does not hate his father for this. He loves his father. He reaches for his father constantly, in the sideways way that boys who have learned not to show need reach for the things they need. He performs for Homer. He wants Homer's attention, Homer's approval, Homer's laughter. When Homer shows up, Bart lights up in a way that the show registers quietly but clearly. But the pattern is there. The throttle is there. And a boy who grows up being physically grabbed when he goes too far, however lovingly, however cartoonishly, grows up with a certain relationship to his own limits, to what happens when you push, to what the cost of being yourself might be. There is an episode where Bart accidentally destroys something very important to Homer. I think of the episode where Homer has invested enormous emotional energy in something, a project or an achievement, and Bart undoes it. And the look on Bart's face in the aftermath is not the look of a prankster. It is the look of a child who has gone too far and knows it, and is watching the consequences arrive and cannot stop them. The guilt on Bart's face in those moments is real. He is not a sociopath. He is a child with poor impulse control and a deep, active conscience. He feels what he does. He just doesn't always stop himself before doing it. And the reason he doesn't stop himself, the reason the impulse keeps winning against the conscience, is the reason the show, in its most honest moments, is willing to look at. Bart is a child who has not been reliably taught that feelings and impulses have consequences that matter. He has been taught, through years of Homer's big, goofy love and Homer's reflexive anger, that emotion is large and immediate, and the aftermath is something you deal with when it arrives. He has learned to be responsive rather than thoughtful, to act and then reckon, because that is the model he was given. This is not an excuse. The show never makes it an excuse. But it is an explanation. And explanations are more honest than the alternative, which is to pretend that children simply are the way they are, without cause, without history, without the shape that was given to them by the people and circumstances that surrounded them, before they had any choice. Bart's relationship with Lisa is one of the most tender things in the show. They fight, of course, constantly, loudly, the way siblings fight who are close in age and different in temperament. But they also see each other. In the quiet episodes, the ones that step back from the comedy and let the siblings just be, there is a genuine intimacy between them. Lisa sees Bart's intelligence, the quick, dirty mind that outpaces his grades. Bart sees Lisa's vulnerability, the sadness under the righteousness. In an episode where Lisa is being bullied, Bart's response is not the ironic detachment he projects to the world. It is immediate, protective, and completely without irony. He wants to help her. He is angry on her behalf. His love for his sister bypasses the whole performance of not caring and arrives clean and direct. That is the Bart underneath the Bart, the one who cares enormously, who feels things with full force, who covers it all with the performance of not caring, because caring has, in his experience, been a liability. The show understood that the most painful thing about Bart Simpson was not his bad grades or his mischief or his disdain for authority. It was that he was a child who was going to have a hard time, and who could sense this, and who was already, at 10 years old, building the emotional fortifications that would let him survive it. Children who build fortifications early can survive a great deal, but fortifications are not the same as healing. And sometimes, in the quiet of a late-season episode, when the camera caught Bart in an unguarded moment, the show let you see the child underneath the fortification, real and frightened and wanting, just like any child, to be seen and held and told that everything was going to be okay. Whether Bart ever fully got that, whether the Bart of Springfield's permanent present tense ever found his way to something more open than his armor, is one of the show's longest-running, most quietly devastating, unanswered questions. Section 5. Lisa and the Weight of Being Awake. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and she is already tired. Not physically tired. She has the energy of a child, runs and plays and stays up late, and wakes early the way children do. But tired in another way. Tired in the way that very perceptive people become tired when their perception is always running ahead of what they are able to do with it. She sees too clearly and feels too much, and lives in a family and a town that are not equipped to meet her at the level where she is operating. And the gap between where she is and where everyone around her is has been open for so long that she has stopped noticing the edges of it, just the persistent, drafty cold. Lisa Simpson is a portrait of a certain kind of childhood that is rarely represented honestly in popular culture. Not childhood poverty, not childhood violence, not childhood trauma, in the extreme forms that get represented because they are dramatic. But the quieter, more ordinary suffering of being a child who is too awake for her own good. Too smart, too empathetic, too in contact with the world's pain. Too aware before she has any right to be aware of how large everything is and how small she is inside it. The show gave her depression in the second season, in that Moaning Lisa episode we discussed in relation to Marge. And it did something remarkable in that episode. It did not explain the depression. It did not give it a cause. Lisa woke up sad one morning and could not tell you why, and the show respected this. Respected the reality that depression is not always caused, not always in response to something, not always a logical result of events. Sometimes it just arrives. Sometimes the chemistry of the brain tips in a direction it was inclined toward, and the child wakes up in a gray world that looked yellow the day before, and there is no one to blame and nothing to fix and nowhere to go with it. The show gave this to an 8-year-old in a network cartoon. That is remarkable. That is the show at its most serious and its most respectful of the reality of the people inside it. Lisa's intelligence is the axis around which her suffering rotates. She is, by any measure, extraordinarily gifted, academically, artistically, intellectually. She reads at a level far beyond her years. She plays the saxophone with a depth of feeling that surprises adults. She thinks through ethical problems with the rigor of a philosophy student. She is, in the most straightforward possible terms, exceptional. And she is 8, and she is in Springfield, and exceptional. In Springfield means isolated. It means raising your hand in class and giving the right answer and watching your classmates look at you with the slightly hostile blankness of people who have decided that your competence is a form of showing off. It means coming home to a family who loves her, genuinely, warmly, completely, but who cannot fully follow her to the places her mind goes. It means being surrounded by people who are good but who are not, in any meaningful sense, her peers. The episode called Lisa's Substitute is the one that breaks everything open. A substitute teacher arrives, Mr. Bergstrom, played with extraordinary warmth by Dustin Hoffman, credited under a pseudonym. And he is everything that Lisa's life is not. He is intelligent, he is curious. He takes her seriously. He treats her intelligence not as a problem to be managed, but as a quality to be celebrated. He sees her. Completely. Clearly. Without the slight discomfort that other adults seem to feel when confronted with a child who is clearly smarter than the situation requires. Lisa falls in love with him, not in a romantic sense. The show handles this with beautiful care, but in the way that starving people fall in love with food, in the way that isolated people fall in love with the first person who makes them feel less isolated. She attaches to him with everything she has because he is the first evidence she has encountered in her actual daily life that there are people out there who are like her, who will understand her, who will see her without flinching. And then, of course, he leaves. He is a substitute. He was never going to stay. The scene where Lisa says goodbye to Mr. Bergstrom is one of the most emotionally precise scenes the show ever produced. She is trying not to cry, and she cannot stop herself. She asks him, with the directness of a child who does not have the adult's armor of indirection, "What do I do when I need help and you're not here?" He writes her a note. He gives it to her folded up. She doesn't open it until later, and when she does, it says, "You are Lisa Simpson, that's all. Just that. Your name is your answer. The thing you are is enough." The person looking for the note is the answer the note contains. It is a piece of wisdom that sounds simple and is in fact very difficult. The idea that your own self, the self that you worry about and find inadequate and feel isolated inside of, is sufficient, is not just the thing you have to work with, but the thing that is genuinely enough, is not easy to accept. It is especially not easy to accept when you are 8, and your experience of yourself has been largely one of not fitting and not being seen, and not having anyone around who operates at the same frequency. Lisa opens the note and cries, and it is one of the great moments in the show's history, and it is entirely, devastatingly sad. Not because the note is not true, it is true, but because the fact that it was necessary, the fact that a child needed to be told this, needed it written down for her to keep, needed proof from outside herself that herself was enough, is its own kind of statement about the life she has been living. Lisa's relationship with her father is one of the show's most layered emotional dynamics. Homer loves Lisa. He is proud of her in his inarticulate, fumbling way. He shows up for her in moments that matter, but he also cannot fully understand her. He sits next to her and loves her sincerely and does not always know what she is talking about. And there is a distance between them that both of them feel and neither of them knows how to close. In the HOMR episode, when Homer has the crayon removed and becomes intelligent, the relationship between him and Lisa changes completely. He can follow her, he can meet her where she is. For a brief, shining period, Lisa has what she has always wanted: a father who understands her, who can talk with her, who can be the peer she has always lacked. And then he chooses to undo it. He reinserts the crayon. He becomes, again, the Homer who loves her and does not fully understand her. Lisa's face in that scene, when she realizes what he has chosen, is one of the most heartbreaking images in the show. She understands why he did it. She loves him enough to understand. But she is also losing something she only just found. A window that opened briefly onto a relationship she has always wanted, and watching it close. The saxophone is Lisa's truest self-expression, and the show is consistently attentive to what it means. Lisa plays when she is sad. She plays at the window with the blue light of dusk coming in, or in her room when the house is too loud, or alone somewhere in Springfield when she needs to be somewhere that is entirely hers. The music she makes is not the music she performs for school or for parents. It is the music she plays for herself, the direct line from what she is feeling to something outside her body. The episode that connects her most deeply to this is the one where Bleeding Gums Murphy, the jazz musician she has befriended, dies. He is one of the few people in Springfield who has ever heard her play and responded to it the way it deserves, with recognition, with respect, with the understanding of one musician for another. His death is handled with a care that the show does not always give to its smaller characters. The episode, Round Springfield, takes the death seriously. It gives Lisa her grief and does not try to comic relieve it away. She stands at the bedside, and then she stands at the grave, and then she manages to do something extraordinary. She plays her saxophone in a way that lets his spirit, or at least his music, reach her one more time. It is magical realism employed in service of grief. It is the show saying, some losses are so real that the realistic doesn't do them justice. Some grief requires something larger than what the physical world provides. Lisa carries her grief for Bleeding Gums forward. She carries all her losses forward. The substitute teacher who left, the father who couldn't quite reach her, the town that couldn't accommodate her, the childhood that kept being too small for what she was. She carries them the way very perceptive people carry things, aware of them, processing them, making music out of them when the alternative is silence. Lisa Simpson is not okay. This is the baseline of who she is. She is functioning. She is thriving by the measures the world uses for thriving. She is doing her schoolwork and playing her music and speaking up at town meetings and demanding better of the people around her. But she is not okay in the deep sense. She is a child who is too much in contact with everything, and that contact costs something. And the cost is what the show is documenting when it stops being funny and just watches her. She is also, and this is the other side of the same coin, extraordinary. Not just intelligent, extraordinary in the deeper sense, the sense of a person whose capacity for feeling and engagement and connection with the world is so large that it becomes its own kind of gift, even as it is also a burden. She will go through the world like this, too awake, too aware, too much, and the world will be different for having her in it, even if the world rarely makes it easy for her. The show knew this about her. In its best moments, it loved her for it. It didn't try to fix her or simplify her or make her easier. It just put her in Springfield, 8 years old, carrying everything she carries, and let her be exactly what she was. That is one of the kindest things the show ever did. Section 6, Mr. Burns, the villain who is always real. Charles Montgomery Burns is the villain of The Simpsons. This is not a complicated statement. He is explicitly, repeatedly, and without much ambiguity, the antagonist. The boss who exploits his workers, the billionaire who manipulates the town, the man who would block out the sun to boost his power company's profits. He is a caricature of American concentrated wealth, drawn with sharp lines and a hunched silhouette, and a voice that drips condescension like something much older than contempt. He is also, in the episodes that bother to look at him carefully, one of the most genuinely tragic figures in the show's long history. The tragedy of Mr. Burns is not the kind that earns sympathy easily. He is not redeemed by the show, not given a moment of awakening that makes you retroactively forgive him. His cruelty is real, and its consequences are real, and the show does not pretend otherwise. But his sadness is also real. And it is the very specific sadness of a man who chose, early and definitively, the wrong things. Who built a life out of the accumulation of power and money and influence, who made himself into the most powerful man in Springfield, and who finds himself at the end of it, ancient, shriveled, surrounded by the evidence of his own dominance, radically, completely, incurably alone. The Rosebud episode is the key to Burns. It is a riff on Citizen Kane, the great American story of a man who had everything and lost the one thing that mattered. And it is both funnier and more genuinely moving than its highbrow reference point. The thing Burns is missing is a teddy bear. Bobo, a stuffed bear he had as a child, before he was taken from his parents and given to a rich man to raise, before the warmth of childhood was replaced with the cold discipline of wealth. He has been looking for the bear ever since, with the particular desperation of a person who cannot say directly what they are actually looking for. The bear ends up with Maggie Simpson, and the episode's resolution, Burns offering Homer vast wealth for the bear, Maggie refusing to give it up, Burns ultimately leaving without it, is played partly for comedy, with Homer's comedic grief at the lost fortune. But the image of Burns at the end, without the bear, is not funny. It is the image of a man who has been denied, again and one more time, the one thing that might have restored something to him. The one thing that predated the choices and the cruelty and the accumulation. The one piece of himself that was left from before. Burns's childhood is glimpsed in pieces across the show's run. He was not born monstrous. He was born a child, a frail, odd, lonely child from what the show suggests, and he was given into the care of a man who raised him, according to a philosophy that was essentially the opposite of love. He was taught that the world was something to be conquered, and people were things to be used, and sentiment was a weakness to be exiled. He was taught to be what he is, which does not excuse what he is, but does mean something about how he got there. The Mother episode, where Burns has a dream about his mother, a woman who has been dead for 100 years, who appears to him gentle and warm and smelling of the past, is one of the more quietly devastating things the show ever did with him. He wakes from the dream, and he is briefly just a very old man who misses his mother. Not a villain, not a caricature, not the antagonist of anything. Just an old man with a loss so old that it has become indistinguishable from himself. Then he is back. The sharpness returns. The coldness returns. Whatever the dream opened for a moment closes. But it opened, and the show let you see inside. Waylon Smithers is the other axis of Burns's tragedy. Smithers has devoted his entire life, his entire professional life, his emotional life, the whole interior architecture of his personhood, to the service of Mr. Burns. He is the most loyal person in the show, perhaps in television. Not a contractual loyalty, not a professional loyalty, but an absolute, all-consuming, total loyalty that has organized itself around Burns the way a planet organizes itself around a star. The show handles Smithers' feelings for Burns with a delicacy that was quite remarkable for a network cartoon of its era, suggesting without stating, allowing without labeling, treating the devotion as real and significant and worthy of emotional weight without turning it into comedy or into tragedy in the obvious ways. Smithers' love for Burns is genuine. Whether Burns is capable of love in return, whether the thing in Burns that once could love was destroyed by everything that was done to him and everything he chose to do, is the show's deepest and most unanswered question about the character. There are moments where Burns seems to feel something for Smithers. Warmth, or its echo. Dependence, which is not love but exists in love's neighborhood. But Burns does not have the vocabulary or the capacity for what Smithers is offering. He received too little too early, and then he chose too hard in the wrong direction. And now the warmth he encounters cannot reach him through the layers of what he has become. Smithers gives his whole life to someone who cannot receive it. That is one of the saddest things in the show. It is played sometimes for comedy, sometimes for pathos, and occasionally for something that sits between the two. A kind of gentle, unflinching acknowledgement that this is a real way for a life to go. That devotion can be real and complete and entirely misplaced. That the person you give yourself to can be genuinely unable to take what you are offering. Not out of malice, but out of a poverty of self that goes all the way down. Burns in his worst moments, blocking the sun, manipulating elections, using his wealth to punish anyone who crosses him, is terrifying in the way that actual concentrated power is terrifying. The show uses him as a political cartoon, and the political cartoon is sharp. But Burns in his quietest moments, in the dreams about his mother and the search for the teddy bear and the dependence on the one person who has never left, in those moments, he is something else. He is what happens when a person chooses power over connection, money over warmth, domination over love for long enough. He is the logical conclusion of a certain set of choices extended over a very long life. He is what the wrong things, accumulated and compounded, look like from the inside, and he is lonely in a way that no amount of power can touch. He is lonely in the way that only people who have systematically destroyed every bridge to warmth can be lonely. He is lonely in the specific register of a person who has had 100 years to realize what he chose and cannot undo any of it. The show does not ask you to weep for him. It does not ask you to forgive him. But in its most honest moments, it asks you to see him, the child he was, the choices he made, the old man he became, and to understand that the villain is also always a person. That cruelty has a history. That emptiness at the center of a powerful man is still emptiness, no matter how much power surrounds it. Mr. Burns stands at the window of his enormous mansion and looks out over Springfield, the town he owns, the people he controls, the evidence of his dominance spread out below him like a map of everything he won. And he is completely, irrevocably alone. That is not comedy. That is not cartoon villainy. That is the show at its most serious and most clear, a portrait of what a life built on the wrong foundations looks like when it is fully built, and the builder is old enough to see it plain. Section 7. Death, Loss, and the Episodes That Made Adults Cry. The Simpsons is not supposed to make you cry. This is the implicit contract of the thing. You sit down with it expecting to laugh, expecting comfort, expecting the familiar bright world of Springfield, with its familiar bright cast and its familiar reliable warmth. You are not sitting down with a tragedy, you are sitting down with a comedy. with a cartoon, with the show that has been in your life for decades and has never failed to be there, never failed to be what it is. And then it makes you cry, not because of a miscalculation, not because the writers forgot what kind of show they were making, but because the show always knew that real comfort, the kind that reaches you in the deep places and stays, is built on honesty. That you cannot have the warmth without acknowledging the cold. That laughter is most full when it coexists with awareness of what there is to mourn. The Simpsons earned its warmth, and the price of the earnings was this. Sometimes the show looked directly at loss, and it did not look away, and it made you feel it. Bleeding gums. Murphy's death was the first major death in the show's run that was treated with genuine emotional weight. Not comedically, not as a throwaway, not as a joke with a setup about mortality. Bleeding Gums was Lisa's friend, her musical mentor, the man who saw her saxophone playing for what it was, and responded to it as an equal. His death removed something from Lisa's world that could not be replaced. Not simply a person, but a connection. A specific quality of being seen that she was unlikely to find again easily. The episode Round Springfield handles the grief directly. Lisa is given the space to be sad, actually sad, in the full register of what it means to lose someone who mattered. The show does not rush past it. It does not comic relieve it away. It stays in the grief the way grief actually operates. Circling, returning, finding the loss in small, unexpected places. The jazz concert at the end, where Bleeding Gums, dead, somehow communicates through a cloud formation, and the music on the radio, reaching back from wherever the dead go to say goodbye properly, is magical realism in the service of emotional truth. The mechanics of it are impossible. The feeling it serves is completely real. Loss does this sometimes. At the end of it, when the mourning has gone on long enough, and the love underneath the mourning has had room to breathe, there is sometimes something that feels like contact. Like the person you lost is not entirely gone. Like the music they played is still playing somewhere, and if you go quiet enough, you can almost hear it. The death of Maud Flanders was handled differently, arrived suddenly, unexpectedly, midway through an episode that was largely comedic in tone. She was hit by t-shirts launched from a promotional cannon at a racing event. The manner of her death was absurd, in the way that actual death is often absurd, undignified, abrupt, the result of circumstances too ridiculous to have been predicted. Real death rarely arrives heroically. Real death often arrives in the middle of something ordinary, from a direction you weren't watching. Ned Flanders, her husband, is one of the show's most carefully handled characters. He is the joke of earnest Christianity, of relentless neighborly cheerfulness, of a piety so consistent it becomes its own kind of comedy. But in the seasons after Maud's death, the show did something with Ned that it rarely did with any character. It showed him actually, durably, consequentially changed by loss. Ned grieves. He does it in his Ned way, with faith and with neighbors and with the Springfield community around him. But he does it genuinely. The grief is not resolved by an episode's end. It continues. It reshapes him. The cheerfulness that existed before Maud was a whole person's cheerfulness. The warmth of someone whose life was full. The cheerfulness after Maud is something different. A man performing the coping that his faith demands. Doing the work of staying upright, aware every morning that the thing that made the uprightness feel natural is gone. The show never made Ned pathetic. It never reduced him to his grief. But it let the grief be real, be present, be part of who he was from that point forward. And in doing so, it did something that television rarely does. It acknowledged that some losses change a person for good, that the person after is genuinely different from the person before, and that this is not a problem to be solved but a fact to be lived with. The episode One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish from the second season is the one where Homer eats potentially fatal blowfish at a Japanese restaurant and is told he has 24 hours to live. The episode follows Homer through those 24 hours as he attempts to do everything he has always meant to do. Patch things up with his father, teach Bart to shave, watch Lisa play in band, spend a night with Marge. The episode is largely comedic, but its emotional core is completely real. What it tracks is the specific pain of a person confronting the things they have left undone. Not terrible things, not failures of morality, but the ordinary omissions of a busy life. The calls not made, the moments not fully attended, The ordinary love not said out loud often enough. Homer survives, in the end. The blowfish was not actually fatal. He wakes the next morning intact, and the relief is genuine, and the comedy resumes. But the episode leaves a residue. A question about whether the version of Homer who spent those 24 hours being present, being intentional, being the father and husband and son he had always meant to be, whether that Homer will persist after the crisis is over, or whether the ordinary drift of ordinary life will pull him back. The show answers this question in a single shot. The next morning, safe and alive and grateful, Homer is on the couch in front of the television, watching a football game. It is a perfect ending, not because it is hopeful, but because it is true. Crises clarify, and then the clarity fades and we return to who we were. Not because we don't mean to be better, but because meaning is not the same as managing. Mona Simpson's death, Homer's mother, was handled with more sustained emotional weight than almost any other death in the show's history. Because it was not just a death, but the completion of a story that had been told across decades, across multiple appearances, across the whole slow arc of Homer and his mother finding their way back to each other. She had come back. She had made amends, or the best amends available. Homer had let her back in slowly, painfully, with the particular difficulty of a person who learned very young that letting people in meant risking their leaving. And they had time together, real time, the kind of time that the childhood didn't have. And then she died. She died in his arms in a moment of ordinary, devastating human loss. Not heroically, not in service of a plot, just the way people die. Too soon. It is always too soon, even when it is old age, even when the body has done its long work and is ready. For Homer, it was too soon because there was still so much unlived between them, still so much that the years away had taken that could not be fully returned. He holds her. He says her name. The camera stays. No joke arrives. No comic deflection. The show lets this be what it is, Blas. A man losing his mother, after losing her once before, and knowing that this time there is no coming back. The grief that follows, spread across the episode, worn quietly, is the grief of compound loss. Not just the loss of the person present, but the loss of the person absent. All those years ago, the child who cried into his pillow and did not understand why she was gone. Homer's adult grief for his mother's death contains within it the child's grief for her disappearance, layered, inseparable. To mourn her death is to also, finally, mourn her absence. To cry for the woman in his arms is to also cry for the woman who walked out the door when he was too small to understand why. The show earned this. It had laid the groundwork carefully over years, and when the moment arrived, it was ready for it. It did not flinch. It let Homer Simpson, who is a comedy character in a comedy show, be fully, completely, uncomplicatedly devastated by the death of his mother. And in doing so, it gave something to everyone who has ever carried that particular weight. The weight of a loss that is both specific and ancient. The weight of loving someone who is not always there. The weight of grief for what was and grief for what wasn't, and grief for the difference between them. These are the episodes people return to. Not always the funny ones, though those too, those first, those always. But these ones. The ones where the show remembered that it was made of real things. That the people inside it were real in the way that matters. Not biologically, not existentially, but emotionally in the place where stories become true by being felt. The Simpsons could not be what it is, could not be the comfort object, the familiar warmth, the Sunday evening companion of a generation, if it had not also, in these moments, looked at what the warmth is warmed against. The cold, the loss, the things that end, the people who leave and the people who stay, and the love that holds through all of it, imperfect and persistent and real. Section 8. Springfield's Darkest Side. Characters. Springfield is populated with some of the most precisely observed minor characters in the history of television. Not simply funny, though they are that, many of them brilliantly so, but observed, written with a specificity and care that suggests the writers knew these people, or knew people like them, or at least understood the type well enough to render it with genuine affection rather than condescension. And in that observation, in the specificity and the care, the darker things sometimes surfaced. Sideshow Bob is one of the show's most complex figures. He begins as a villain, literally as the villain's sidekick, a character whose function is to be hit in the face with rakes and to plot revenge against the child who exposed his crimes. He is the educated man humiliated by circumstance, the intellectual dragged down to the level of the clown, the cultured person perpetually thwarted by the demands of a world that refuses to engage at his level. The comedy of Sideshow Bob is the comedy of failed dignity. He is enormous, physically overpowering, possessed of genuine brilliance, and he has spent years in prison for attempting to murder a 10-year-old. The gap between his self-conception, as a person of taste and sophistication, a man of letters in the Matthew Arnold tradition, a soul too refined for Springfield, and his actual circumstances is the engine of his comedy. But the darkness in Sideshow Bob is the darkness of a wasted life, not wasted by external forces, not the victim of unfair systems, wasted by the man himself, by the choice to make his thwarted ambition into something destructive. He is brilliant, and the brilliance has nowhere to go, and the nowhere has curdled into obsession and rage. He is a man who could have been something and instead became a recurring problem for a cartoon family. There is an episode where Sideshow Bob is given a chance at a genuine life. He moves away, reforms, marries, has a child, and for a while the villainy recedes. He is almost ordinary, almost the person he might have been if the rage hadn't colonized everything. And then Bart arrives in his vicinity and the obsession reasserts itself, and the life he was building crumbles because he cannot stop being what he is. That is genuinely sad. Not the kind of sad that asks for your sympathy. You are not meant to feel sorry for a man trying to kill a child. But the kind of sad that the show is willing to look at. The sad of wasted potential, of a person who could not get out of their own way, of a life that kept being destroyed by the worst version of itself. Groundskeeper Willie is, on the surface, a one-note comedy character. He is the Scottish groundskeeper, aggressive and proud and perpetually aggrieved. He charges at things. He tears his shirt off. He represents a kind of exaggerated masculinity that the show uses for comic effect. But Willie has a backstory that the show sketches in pieces, and the picture it sketches is one of genuine exile and genuine loss. He came from Scotland, was in some versions of the continuity, exiled from it, driven out, or failed by it. He has ended up in Springfield, which is not a place anyone would choose, maintaining a school for children who do not notice him. He lives in a small shed on school grounds, which is both a comedic detail and, if you stay with it for a moment, a genuinely bleak one. A man who lives in a shed at his place of work, who has no home outside that work, who has organized his entire existence around a building that belongs to other people and is empty most hours of the day. What Willie has lost and how he lost it is never fully explained. The show drops hints. The exile, the homeland, something he left or something that left him, but it never assembles them into a complete account, which is actually more honest than a complete account would be. People carry losses they never fully explain, even to themselves. Willie's gruffness is the armor of a man who has learned, through experience, that tenderness does not survive well in the world he has lived in. Apu Nahasapima Patilan, the owner of the Quick E-Mart, is a character around whom the show's relationship to representation became, in later years, a site of genuine and important critique. The accent, the stereotype, the reduction of a complex cultural identity to a series of jokes about convenience stores and slushies. This is a real problem, and the critiques of it are valid and worth engaging. But there are episodes, early episodes that predate the solidification of the character into pure stereotype, where Apu is treated with genuine care, where the show asks what it is like to be an immigrant in a place like Springfield. Not the heroic immigrant narrative, not the triumphant one, but the ordinary, grinding, lonely experience of being from somewhere else in a place that is not entirely sure how to see you. There is an episode that follows Apu's relationship with Homer, a friendship that develops, unexpected and genuine, between the two of them. And in the course of that friendship, Apu is allowed to be something more than his function. He is allowed to be homesick. to be educated. He has a PhD, a detail the show uses for comedy, but that also says something real about the economics of immigration, about the gap between qualification and opportunity, about the specific indignity of being overqualified for a life you chose because the alternatives were worse. He is allowed to be lonely in the way that immigrants are lonely. Not simply missing people or places, but missing a version of themselves that was fully legible, that did not require constant translation, that did not have to navigate every daily interaction with an awareness of being from somewhere else. The show gave him this in those episodes, and then gradually gave it away. The character was flattened over time into the joke, Zikes, and the jokes outran the humanity. That is a different kind of darkness in the show's history. Not the intentional darkness, the honest look at difficult things, but the careless darkness of a long-running show that stops paying attention to the people it created. Nelson Muntz, Bart's frenemy, has one of the most overtly tragic backstories of any character in Springfield. His father abandoned the family, his mother is present sometimes and absent others, a character defined by neglect and chaos. Nelson lives, essentially, without the protective structures of a functional home, and the show is occasionally willing to look at what that means. There is an episode where Nelson's home life is exposed to scrutiny, and what is revealed is neither comedic nor comfortable. A child living in genuine material and emotional deprivation, making it work through the only strategies available to him: aggression, bravado, the performance of not caring that children in difficult circumstances, perfect as a survival mechanism. Nelson's laugh, the ha-ha, the pointing laugh, the laugh at others' misfortune that is one of the show's most durable gags, is, in the context of his actual life, a complicated thing. Laughter as defense. Laughter as the only power available to a person who has very little. Laughter at others because it is easier than acknowledging your own position. The show is not always this careful with Nelson. Often he is just the bully, the laugh, the function. But in the episodes that look, what they see is a child who has been failed, who is managing the failure the only ways he can, who will probably carry it into an adulthood that the show, frozen in its permanent present tense, will never show. Krusty the Clown's darkness is the show's most explicit and most sustained exploration of performance and private suffering. Krusty is, professionally, joy. He is the entertainment for Springfield's children, the man in the costume, the laugh and the chaos and the pratfall. Children love him. He is their clown. And Krusty is deeply, persistently unhappy. The gap between the performer and the person is one of the show's oldest recurring themes, and Krusty is where it lives most nakedly. He is a Jew from a rabbinical family who became a clown against his father's wishes, who performed his way to celebrity and found celebrity empty, who is estranged from his only child, who gambles and drinks and self-destructs with the specific determination of a man who has given up on himself. He puts on the wig and the makeup and becomes the thing children love. And then he takes it off and is someone who cannot love himself, who does not know how, who left the person who might have taught him how to do it behind so long ago that he cannot find his way back. The episode where Krusty is reconciled with his father, Herschel Kristofsky, the rabbi, voiced by Jackie Mason in a performance of extraordinary warmth, is one of the show's genuine emotional triumphs. Because the reconciliation is not simple. It is not a matter of one of them being wrong and one right. It is two people who love each other, separated by a choice that one of them made and the other couldn't accept, finding their way through the pride and the hurt to the love underneath. The rabbi did not understand why his son chose the clown. The son could not explain it in a way the father could hear. And so they lost decades, and the love sat unused on both sides, and now they are old and the decades cannot be returned. And what is left is to reach across the remaining space as best they can. They do imperfectly, haltingly, in the show's way, with comedy surrounding the emotion, softening its edges. But the emotion is there, the reach is real. The love, which was always there even through the separation, has somewhere to land. Springfield's side characters are one of the show's great gifts to the art form. Not simply the comedy they provide, but the completeness they suggest. The sense that Springfield is a real place populated by real people who have real histories and real pains and real small private lives beyond the frames of the episodes they appear in. Barney Gumble, who was a promising student before alcohol took everything. Principal Skinner with his mother and his secret life and the specific sadness of a man who fought in a war and came home to find the world had moved on without him. Dr. Nick, whose incompetence as a physician barely conceals the outline of a man who simply lost his way somewhere and never found it again. Each of them is a sketch of a life. Each of them is a small portrait of something real. And together, in aggregate, they make Springfield into what it is. Not a backdrop for Homer's adventures, but a world. A full, complete, imperfect, aching world. The kind of world that is worth setting stories in because it is the kind of world that actually exists. Section 9. The Treehouse of Horror. When the metaphors dropped the mask. Every October, The Simpsons did something unusual. It stopped pretending. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, the annual Halloween specials, running across the entire history of the show, were officially non-canonical. They existed outside the rules of the regular continuity. Characters died and it didn't count. The laws of physics bent and then broke, and no one had to explain why. Reality did not need to cohere because these were horror stories, fantasy stories, parodies of things that already existed outside the show's world. They were the designated space for the impossible. But here's what happens when you give a show about ordinary American life a designated space for the impossible. The impossible starts telling truths that the ordinary cannot accommodate. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are, in many ways, the most honest episodes in the entire run. Not because they are realistic, they are the furthest thing from realistic, but because the horror genre has always been, at its core, a genre for things that are too frightening to say plainly. Horror is the container for what cannot be said directly. The monster at the door is the thing you actually fear. The haunted house is the home you actually live in. The possession, the invasion, the transformation. These are the metaphors that get at the truths that everyday realism cannot quite reach. The Shining parody, called The Shinning in the show's loving riff on Kubrick's title, is perhaps the most psychologically precise thing in the Treehouse of Horror canon. It takes the premise of a man isolated with his family and slowly losing his mind, and turns it, as it must, into comedy. Homer goes mad. Homer chases his family with an axe. Homer's descent into violence is played for laughs in the way that only a cartoon can play homicidal rage for laughs. But The Shining is not at its core a story about a haunted hotel. It is a story about what a man becomes when the obligations of family and the disappointments of ambition have been building for too long without outlet. It is a story about a man who is failing and cannot acknowledge the failure, and who turns the unacknowledged failure into something that his family has to run from. It is, in other words, a story about Homer Simpson in a horror genre key. The haunting that gets to Homer in The Shining is not supernatural. It is the thing that was always going to get him. The desire to be more than he is. The frustration with his circumstances. The beer. Specifically, the absence of beer, the cutting off of the one reliable anesthetic, and what happens to the frustration when it is no longer anesthetized. The madness of Homer in The Shining is the madness of Homer in the regular show, given a room to expand into. The comedy is real, and the horror underneath it is also real. Both things are true simultaneously. That is how good horror parody works. The Citizen Kang episode, where the aliens Kang and Kodos replace both presidential candidates in an election year, and the American public, presented with only two options, votes for one of the aliens, is political satire so sharp it drew blood. It aired in 1996 during an actual presidential election, and it worked because it was not really about aliens at all. It was about the binary of democratic politics, about the way a two-party system creates a trap. Vote for one of two choices, neither of which may represent you, because the alternative is to throw away your vote and let the outcome be decided without you. The aliens argue explicitly that they have already won because the American system does not permit any other result. Resistance is futile within the rules of the system. The rules of the system are the problem. The episode ends with the aliens victorious, driving Americans to labor on massive space construction projects. And one character suggests that maybe they should have voted for a third-party candidate, and another character says, "Go ahead, throw your vote away." It is a joke. It is also one of the bleakest things in the show's history, a diagnosis of a democratic failure that was, in 1996, already deeply real and has only deepened in the decades since. The show said, "This is what you have, and the what you have is rigged, and the rigging is the point." And then it put it in the mouth of an alien, and the audience laughed. That is the genius of horror as political tool. The monster can say what the human cannot. The segment where Homer sells his soul for a donut and then keeps eating the donut, unable to stop even knowing the cost, is one of the more transparent metaphors in the Treehouse catalog. The soul for the donut is the conscience for the pleasure, the willingness to consume beyond all reason, beyond all consequence, beyond the thing that makes you human. That is not a Halloween story. That is Homer. That is every person who has ever known the cost of something and eaten it anyway because the hunger was more immediate than the knowledge. The devil here is not external. The devil is the donut, and the donut is desire itself, the desire that cannot be argued with, cannot be managed by reason, that simply exists and must be fed. Homer, confronted with the ultimate temptation, does not resist. He eats. He keeps eating. He eats even as the consequences arrive because the desire is too strong, and the self-control was never strong enough, and the hunger wins. The hunger always wins. A theology student could write a paper about this. The show knew what it was doing. The segments where Springfield residents discover something terrifying, aliens in their midst, a supernatural presence in their home, a technology that turns against them, are consistently using the horror format to do what the horror format does, to externalize an internal fear, to give shape and body to something that in reality is shapeless and bodiless. The fear of aliens walking among us is the fear of not being able to trust your community, of the familiar face concealing something incomprehensible. The haunted house is the home that does not feel safe, the domestic space where the threat is not from outside but from inside. The technology that turns against us is the tool we cannot control, the thing we made that now owns us. All of these fears are present in regular Springfield, in the non-Halloween episodes, in the daily texture of the show's reality. Homer cannot trust his employer. His home contains his own anger, his own inadequacies, the gaps between who he is and who he wants to be. The power plant, the great mechanical presence at the center of the show, is the technology that cannot be controlled, that has already turned against the town, that poisons and irradiates and cannot be shut down because too much depends on it. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the regular show with the lights off. They are the same place at night, when the comfortable daytime logic has been replaced by the logic of dreams. Not random, not nonsensical, but following a different set of rules. The rules of fear. The rules of what we cannot say in daylight. What the show says in daylight in its regular episodes is, life is hard but lovable. People are flawed but worthy. Family is messy, but the mess is the point. The humor is warm and the warmth is earned. What it says at night, in October, when the masks are on and the lights are low and the horror format gives it permission, life is frightening. People are capable of real darkness. The systems around us, political, economic, domestic, are not always what they appear. The thing that looks familiar may not be safe. The thing that smiles at you may have something else underneath. Both things are true. The show always knew this. It just needed different seasons for different truths. The episode where Homer is pulled into another dimension, a sequence that stands as one of the most visually inventive things the show ever produced. Homer tumbling through the third dimension, through a CGI realm that was startling and uncanny in 1995, is a different kind of horror. Not the horror of violence or monsters, but the horror of displacement. Of being somewhere you do not understand, where the rules you have always operated by no longer apply. Of being in the wrong dimension, and knowing it, and not knowing how to get back. Homer characteristically does not panic. He explores. He is curious, delighted even, by the strangeness of where he has ended up. And then the dimension starts to collapse and he falls through to our world. The real world, the live-action world, the world outside the cartoon. And he is there, Homer Simpson in Los Angeles, standing on a real street among real people, looking around with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he was never supposed to be. The horror of the segment is philosophical rather than visceral. What does it mean to exist in the wrong place? What does it mean to be a cartoon character in a live-action world, a fictional person in a real one? What does it mean to be Homer Simpson at all? To be the specific, narrow, beloved, limited thing that he is, in a world wider and stranger than Springfield? The show did not answer this. It turned the camera and went back to Springfield. And Homer was there, at the couch, at the table, back in the world he belonged to. But the question had been asked, and it stays asked, long after the episode ends and the Halloween special is over and the regular world resumes. What are we, any of us, when taken out of our context? What is left when the familiar frames are removed? What does it mean to be a person in a world that does not fully recognize you? That you do not fully understand? That is larger and stranger and less manageable than the place you were made for? The Treehouse of Horror asks this every October, and then it put the masks back on, and the credits rolled. Section 10. Relationships, Marriage, and the Sadness of Love in Springfield. The most radical thing The Simpsons ever did was to build its entire architecture around a marriage that worked. Not worked in the sense of being perfect, not worked in the sense of being smooth or easy or uncomplicated, but worked in the sense that mattered. In the sense that Homer and Marge, despite everything, despite the fights and the distance and the fundamental incompatibility of their temperaments and the enormous structural challenges of their life together, kept choosing each other, kept coming back, kept finding, in each other, something worth the difficulty. This sounds unremarkable until you consider the landscape of television marriage at the time the show began. Sitcom marriages in the late 1980s were almost uniformly satirical in their treatment. The nagging wife, the checked-out husband, the marriage as the butt of the joke rather than the subject of genuine inquiry. Marriage as punchline. Marriage is what happened to men when they were no longer free. The Simpsons married. The Simpsons took this premise and did something unexpected with it. It took the marriage seriously. Not portentously, not melodramatically, but as a real thing, a genuinely complex thing, worthy of actual examination. And what it found when it examined it was not a punchline. It was a love story. A strange, imperfect, yellow-skinned, animated love story, but real. The episode A Millhouse Divided is not primarily about Homer and Marge. It is, as the title suggests, about the Millhouse family, about Kirk and Luann Van Houten, whose marriage collapses in the course of the episode in a way that is played for comedy and also, in its specifics, played exactly right. The collapse is not dramatic. It is the collapse of two people who have grown in different directions and can no longer find the overlap, the common ground, the shared language that would let them continue. Kirk Van Houten, post-divorce, is one of the show's most quietly devastating character studies. He tries to reconstruct his identity outside the marriage, gets an apartment, talks about his freedom, uses the word available to describe himself in a way that is unbearable to hear. His one-man band demo tape, his attempts at independence, his relationship with his son, these are the fumbling efforts of a man who does not know who he is outside the context that defined him, trying to build something from pieces that don't quite fit. But what the episode does for Homer is the thing worth staying with. Homer watches the Van Houten marriage fall apart and recognizes something. He hears Luann's complaint, the specific complaint of a woman who has stopped being seen by the person who is supposed to see her most clearly. And he hears it in a way that reaches him. He understands, in the way that Homer occasionally understands things when the right circumstances align, that what happened to the Van Houtens is not impossible for the Simpsons. That love requires tending, that the person across from you is a person, not a fixture, and that treating them as a fixture is how fixtures get left behind. Homer, in response to this realization, does something remarkable. He divorces Marge. Specifically, he divorces her and immediately remarries her in a new ceremony with a real commitment, so that she will know that the marriage she has is not the marriage she is stuck in, but the marriage he is choosing. It is a wild and slightly absurd gesture. It is Homer. But the feeling underneath it is genuine, and Marge knows it is genuine. And the episode ends on a warmth that is earned rather than assumed. The line that Homer says to Marge in this episode, or one of the lines in another episode that circles the same territory, is one of the most honest things the show ever said. He tells her, in one form or another, "I am aware that I am not enough. I am aware that you deserve better than what I am able to give. But I am also the person who loves you most. And that has to count for something, and I am asking you to let it count. That is not a line from a comedy. That is a line from a marriage. From the interior of a real marriage, where the arithmetic of love is more complicated than either person would prefer, where what you have and what you want are not always the same thing, and the decision is how much of the gap to live with. The Simpsons showed us, across hundreds of episodes, that Homer and Marge lived with the gap, that they found the gap worth it, that the reasons to stay outweighed the reasons to go, not because the reasons to go were small, but because the reasons to stay were real. The Do It For Her plaque is the other great romantic image in the show's history, perhaps in all of television. In the episode And Maggie Makes Three, Homer reveals that he keeps the motivational plaque, the one that said, "Don't forget you're here forever," with Maggie's baby photos pasted over it so that it reads, "Do it for her." The original plaque was a reminder of Homer's imprisonment, his limitation, the life he was stuck with. The altered version is the same plaque reading as something else entirely, as a choice, a love, a reason. The same words, the same fact of his situation, reframed by the presence of his daughter into something bearable and even beautiful. This is not the comedy of the show. This is its thesis statement. The Simpsons has always been about the reframing, about the fact that the life you have, with its limits, its disappointments, its structural unfairness, is also the life that contains the people you love. And the people you love do not fix the limits or the disappointments, but they change what those things mean. They give them a context in which they become, if not exactly choices, then at least not simply burdens. Homer did not choose the job at the power plant in any meaningful sense. He fell into it and stayed because staying was easier than leaving and because the money covered the bills. But he chose the family. Every morning, in ways the show rarely made explicit but consistently demonstrated, he was choosing the family. Every return home, the door opening, the smell of dinner, Bart's noise and Lisa's music, and Maggie's silence and Marge's quiet presence at the center of everything, was a choice being renewed. The show about marriage and love is ultimately the show about that choice, about how small the daily renewals are and how enormous they add up to. The episode where Homer and Marge go to marriage counseling is the one where the show allows itself to say most directly what it usually keeps in the subtext. That this marriage is hard, that two people who love each other deeply can still struggle to communicate, that love is not sufficient without effort, and effort is not always available, and the gap between the love and the effort is where marriages go wrong even when no one wants them to. The counseling is, on the surface, comedy. The therapist who has given up, the ridiculous exercises, the Springfield setting that cannot quite contain the earnestness of the premise. But the things Homer and Marge say to each other in the sessions are real. The grievances are real. The longing for understanding is real. Two cartoon characters sit across from each other in a therapist's office and say things to each other that real people say to each other in therapists' offices, and the show does not undercut this. It lets them say it, and they find their way back. They always find their way back, not because the problems disappear, but because the finding the way back is the show's core assertion. That this is what love is. The return, over and over, to the person you chose. The return after the fight, after the silence, after the moment where you looked at the person across from you and felt the distance and couldn't immediately find the bridge. The return is the love. Not the easy moments, not the romance, not the days when everything lines up and the warmth is effortless. The return, the choice to come back. Marge and Homer's relationship exists in tension with every other relationship in the show. Around them, marriages fail. Kirk and Luann, Patty and her cigarettes and the men who don't measure up, Selma and her parade of unsuitable husbands, Krusty and whoever he is currently miserable with. Springfield is littered with the wreckage of failed partnerships. The show presents this not as comedy, but as fact. Relationships fail, often for reasons that are understandable and sad and not anyone's particular fault. Against this wreckage, Homer and Marge stand. Not perfectly, not easily, but standing. The episode where Marge considers an affair, where a handsome, attentive man pays her the kind of focused attention she never gets from Homer, and she is moved by it, and she has to decide what to do with that movement, is handled with extraordinary honesty. Marge's attraction is real. It is not villainized or pathologized. She is a person who has been going largely unseen for a long time, and someone has seen her, and that is intoxicating in a way that her love for Homer does not neutralize. Love is not the same as not being hungry. The hunger for being seen is its own thing, and it does not go away simply because you love your husband. She does not act on it. She chooses Homer. She chooses the marriage. But the episode is honest about the cost of the choice, about what it means to turn away from the thing that is easy, the fresh attention, the uncomplicated desire, the man who has not yet had the chance to disappoint you, and return to the complicated real thing, the thing that has the history and the struggle and the knowledge of your worst days mixed in with the best. That choice is the show's entire argument about love. Not that love should be without difficulty, not that difficulty is a sign of failure, but that real love, the kind worth having, the kind worth fighting for, is always in some sense a choice made against easier alternatives. And the choice, made daily, made imperfectly, made in the full knowledge of the costs, is where the meaning lives. Homer and Marge will never be separate in a way that sticks. The show ensures this, and the audience expects it, and both of these facts are true. But they are also true in the deeper sense. They are not simply plot mechanics. They are a statement about what the show believes. That two people can be genuinely wrong for each other in dozens of ways and still be right for each other in the one way that counts. That the counting is the thing. That love is the choice to keep counting. Section 11. The Night Side of Springfield. Poverty, addiction, and the city itself. There is a Springfield that exists in the episode's margins. Not the Springfield of Homer's adventures, or Bart's pranks, or the civic comedies of Mayor Quimby and Chief Wiggum. A different Springfield, glimpsed in the background of shots, implied in the texture of the town's reality, present in the faces of characters whose stories the show did not always have time to tell. The Springfield of poverty, of quiet desperation, of lives caught in systems too large and too indifferent to be navigated by individual will alone. The show's relationship to class is one of its most consistently honest attributes. Springfield is a working-class town. This is not decoration. It is structural. The power plant employs half the town, and the plant is the power plant, and the power plant is Burns's, and Burns is the economic center of gravity around which everything orbits. The economy of Springfield is the economy of company town America. You work for the man owns the town, and the alternatives to working for the man are limited enough that working for the man is not really a choice in any meaningful sense. Homer makes $24,000 a year. This figure was mentioned in an episode and is, in the real world, a poverty wage for a family of 5. The show depicts the Simpsons as financially strained in a way that the comedy usually renders bearable, but that the more serious episodes render visible in its actual weight. They almost lose their house more than once. The financial anxiety that Homer carries, the awareness, present even through the comedy, that the margin between the life they have and a much harder life is extremely thin, is one of the textures of his character that the show maintains even when it is not the focus. The episode about Homer taking a second job, driving a limousine at night to cover the bills after an unexpected expense, is one of the show's most direct engagements with the economics of working-class life. It is funny. It is also accurate. The second job to cover the unexpected bill, the body that starts to give out under the combined hours of both jobs. The family that barely sees the man they need because the man they need is working 2 shifts so the family can continue to exist. This is the life of millions of Americans. The show put it in Springfield, made it yellow, wrapped it in jokes, and showed it to the people living that life so they could laugh at it and then perhaps feel slightly less alone in it. Barney Gumble is the show's most extended portrait of alcoholism. He is played for comedy, the burps, the incompetence, the warm befuddlement of the perpetually drunk. But his backstory, in the episodes that engage with it seriously, is the backstory of a genuine tragedy. Barney was a promising student. He had options. He had intelligence and potential, and the kind of future that the young people around him could look at and recognize as real. And then Homer, on the day before they were to take their college entrance exams, offered him his first beer. One beer, one afternoon, and something in Barney that was either predisposed toward addiction or simply too young and unguarded to resist was caught. The exam was missed. The future was missed. The version of Barney that could have been, the student, the professional, the person with a life built on something besides the barstool at Moe's, was unmade before it could fully be made. The show returns to this occasionally, and when it does, it is careful. There is an episode where Barney gets sober. He has an entire story of recovery. The effort of it, the difficulty of it, the way sobriety changes the world around you, makes it both clearer and harder to bear. He makes a film. He reconnects with himself. He becomes, briefly, the Barney who might have existed. And then he relapses. A champagne cork, a single, accidental, entirely not his fault encounter with champagne. And the recovery dissolves. He is back at Moe's. The show does not judge him for this. It understands addiction, in this episode and the episodes around it, as the thing it actually is, not a moral failure, not a weakness, not something that can be resolved by wanting to be better. A real thing, a biological thing, a thing with genuine power over the person it has hold of. Barney wants to be better. Barney has wanted to be better for years. The wanting is not in question. The wanting is just not enough. That is accurate and dark and true. And the show set it in the middle of a cartoon. And the people in the audience who recognized it, the ones with the Barneys in their lives, or who were the Barneys in their own lives, recognized it precisely and felt, if not comfort, then at least recognition. The show saw them. The show knew what they were dealing with. Moe's Tavern is the show's most persistent dark space. It is present in almost every episode. It is where Homer goes when the house is too loud, or the day has been too much, or the need for something to dull. The edges has become louder than the reasons not to answer it. Moe's is the place where the men of Springfield go to be temporarily not who they are, not husbands, not fathers, not employees, not the sum of their responsibilities. Just people sitting at a bar, with a drink in front of them, and the company of other people who are also, in their way, briefly not themselves. Moe himself is one of the show's great unloved figures. He is unpleasant, frequently. He is dishonest, often. He is bitter in the specific way that people are bitter when they had a plan once, and the plan failed. And now they are here, in the bar they own, serving drinks to people who are also failing their plans. But the show has, in episodes that care about him, given Moe a full interior life. He has wanted things. He has reached for things. For love, for recognition, for a version of himself that was better than the version he became. There are episodes where someone sees this Moe, the reaching one, and responds to him, and he is briefly someone different, warmer, more open, capable of the kind of connection that his ordinary presentation makes impossible. And then the connection fails or ends, and he is back behind the bar, and the bitter Moe returns, and the bar is what it is again. Moe's phone number is in the Springfield phone book as Moe's Tavern with no other listing. It is, in effect, an anonymous listing. A bar that exists outside the normal taxonomy of places. That is, if you wanted to read it that way, a statement about what bars like Moe's are for. Places outside the regular world where different rules apply, where the ordinary accounting of who you are and what you owe does not follow you through the door. The quick E-Mart, the nuclear plant, the school, the police station, these are the institutions of Springfield's public life. Moe's is the institution of its private one, the place where the private life retreats when the public one becomes too much. Springfield's geography matters because Springfield is everywhere and nowhere, as we said in the sections about the show's mysteries. But what it is geographically, what it feels like, is a Rust Belt town. A town that was built around one industry that never fully diversified, that is therefore at the mercy of that industry in every dimension of its collective existence. The economics, the environment, the health outcomes, the political dynamics, all of it flows from the plant. All of it is Burns's in the end. Towns like this exist in America. They have for a long time, and the show's long run has coincided with the long decline of many of them. The factories closed in the 80s and the 90s. The jobs went away. The towns stayed, because towns always stay, because the houses and the churches and the schools. And the bars, staying long after the reason the town existed, has gone. And the people stayed too, or tried to, because this was home. Because this was the place they knew. Because leaving was not as simple as the economists who recommended it made it sound. Springfield's plant has not closed. It may never close in the show's frozen timeline. Burns is still there, still running the thing, still providing the town its reason to exist. But the atmosphere, the sense of a place that is perpetually one decision away from catastrophe, that depends for its survival on the goodwill or at least the self-interest of a single man, it was time, that atmosphere is the atmosphere of real American industrial towns. The show captured it, kept it, let it breathe in the background of every episode. The kids of Springfield will grow up and most of them will leave. The ones who stay will work at the plant or the quick E-Mart or in one of the small businesses that orbit the town's economic center. Some of them will end up at Moe's. Some of them will end up as the next generation of Barneys. People who had possibilities that narrowed, who found their way to a bar stool and stayed. This is not cynicism. The show is not cynical about Springfield or about the people who live there. It loves them, the whole raucous, flawed, yellow-skinned lot of them. But it sees them clearly. It sees the systems they are inside of and the way the systems shape the lives they can live. It sees the line between the life available and the life desired, and it does not pretend the line is not there. That seeing is what made the show matter. Not the jokes alone, not the celebrity guest appearances or the cultural references or the elaborate set pieces. The seeing, the attention, the care brought to the creation of a fictional world that felt like the actual world, the world outside the television, the world where people sat on their actual couches and watched their actual Springfields go by and felt, somewhere in the part of themselves that recognized truth when it arrived, that this show knew something, that this show was paying attention, that this show had looked at what their lives actually were and had chosen, for some reason, to make it beautiful. Even the sad parts, especially the sad parts. That is where beauty most needs to be made, in the places that the world would prefer to look away from, in the lives that get called failures, in the bars and the plant floors and the late-night kitchens where people stand alone in the dark and feel the weight of things and do not have words for it. The Simpsons gave them words, yellow cartoon words, wrapped in jokes, delivered with a laugh track, but words that reached. And in the reaching, in those millions of moments where the show and the audience found each other in the dark, something real happened, something that is still happening. That is what great art does. It reaches across the dark and finds you, and for a moment, for the length of an episode, for the duration of a voice in the night, you are less alone in whatever it is you are carrying. Springfield is not a real place, but the things it was made of are real. The loneliness is real. The love is real. The imperfect family and the imperfect town and the imperfect lives managed as well as anyone can manage them. All of it real, all of it present in the world, all of it waiting to be seen. The Simpsons saw it. For 36 seasons, across nearly 800 episodes, in the middle of the night and on Sunday evenings and in every quiet hour, when someone needed a show that knew something, it saw. And that was enough. That is more than enough. That is, when you think about it in the long, slow hours of the night, extraordinary. Section 12. What the dark scenes were always saying. A final walk through Springfield. We have been walking for a while now, through Homer's kitchen and Marge's anxiety and Bart's armor and Lisa's window, through Burns's mansion and Moe's tavern and the power plant's cracked cooling towers, through the deaths and the griefs and the quiet moments when the comedy stopped and the truth stepped through, through the marriages and the failures and the things that held despite the reasons to let go. We have been walking slowly, the way you walk through a place you know well but want to know better. The way you walk through memory. Not to check the facts, but to feel the temperature. To sit in the rooms. To notice what the rooms contain. There is a thing that happens with long-running television shows, particularly the ones that become deeply embedded in the culture. After a certain number of years, after a certain number of episodes, the show stops being simply a show and becomes something else. It becomes a measure, a reference point, a shared language. The people who grew up with it carry it in a different way than they carry things they encountered later, not as content consumed, but as background radiation, present in the formation of the self, woven into the years when the self was being made. The Simpsons has this relationship with a generation, It is so woven into the texture of the last 36 years of American cultural life that to watch it now, particularly in the quiet of a late night, is to encounter not just the show but the person you were when you first watched it. The child on the couch, the teenager who memorized the lines, the young adult who quoted it to seem clever and then later quoted it again because the things it said turned out to be true. The dark scenes we have been moving through tonight are the places where the show said true things, not comfortable things, not the things that made you laugh, or not only those, the things that made you feel in the specific way that real recognition makes you feel. Seen, acknowledged, less alone in the particular difficulty of whatever it was the show was naming. Homer choosing the crayon because the pain of seeing clearly was worse than the comfort of not seeing. That is a true thing about what people do when life becomes too much to bear. It does not have to be a literal crayon. The mechanisms of self-protection are various and personal and almost always come at a cost. We use what is available. We accept the diminishment if the diminishment makes the remaining possible. Marge performing contentment because the alternative costs too much. That is a true thing about the labor of being a woman in a family. In a culture that has historically rewarded the performance and ignored the cost of the performance. The smile coached into Lisa is the smile that gets coached into daughters in 1,000 different forms, in 1,000 different households. And the moment Marge withdraws the coaching is the moment a mother decides that her daughter's authentic feelings matter more than the comfort of the people around her. That moment is small and enormous simultaneously. Bart's armor, the performance of not caring, built out of the materials of repeated hurt, that is a true thing about childhood and what childhood does to the people it contains when the containers are not quite right. Children are built by their circumstances whether they choose to be or not. The Bart underneath the Bart is still there, wanting, hoping, frightened. The armor is not the person. The armor is what the person built to survive. Lisa at the window with the saxophone, playing the feelings she cannot otherwise speak, into the Springfield dusk. That is a true thing about art, about what art is for. Art is what you make when the world does not have room for what you are, when the feelings are too large for the ordinary containers, when you need somewhere to put the excess. The saxophone is the place Lisa puts what Springfield cannot hold. Burns at the end of everything, surrounded by the evidence of what he has accumulated and accompanied by the absence of everything that would have made the accumulation worth anything. That is a true thing about the choice to pursue power at the expense of warmth. Not a sermon, not a moral, just an account. This is what that choice looks like, carried to its conclusion over a very long life. Ned Flanders trying and trying, doing everything right, receiving silence in return, while the universe speaks directly to the man next door who does everything wrong. That is a true thing about the world's indifference to goodness. The world does not reward goodness. It sometimes rewards goodness by accident or coincidence, but it does not reliably do so, and the person who has organized their entire life around the expectation of reward for righteousness is setting themselves up for a specific kind of devastation. The show did not comfort Ned. It honored him. There is a difference, and the difference matters. The do-it-for-her plaque, Homer's secret, kept for years, the evidence of a love expressed not in words or grand gestures, but in a small private transformation of the thing that reminded him of his limitations. That is a true thing about how love actually operates in the long term. Not in the declarations, in the small acts, in the way the unbearable thing becomes bearable because of who is in it with you, in the face on the plaque, in the reason for the return, in the daily choice renewed without ceremony. These are the things the show was always saying, in the dark, underneath the laughter. It was saying, life is hard and also worth it. Love is insufficient and also everything. People are capable of real cruelty and real kindness, and usually of both, and the distribution is rarely as clean as we would prefer. The systems we live inside shape us whether we consent to being shaped or not. The family you are born into and the family you make are both yours to carry, with all their weight and all their warmth. It was saying, the ordinary is not small. The life on the couch, the life in the kitchen, the life of the working person in the working town, Trying to make it to the end of the week with enough left over to feel like a person? This life matters. This life contains everything: comedy and tragedy and love and loss, and the specific human quality of being always somewhat more and somewhat less than you would ideally be. It was saying through all of it, through the 800 episodes and the 36 years, and the thousands of moments when it could have looked away but chose to look. You are not alone in this. Whatever this is, the worry, the grief, the longing, the specific sadness of a life that is both everything you have and not quite everything you wanted. You are not alone. Springfield has always been there in the television light, in the cartoon glow, and the people in it have always been, in the deepest sense, us. We built Springfield, not the writers, or not only the writers. We built it by watching it for so long that it became ours. By returning to it in the bad years and the good years and the ordinary years that make up most of a life. By letting it become the texture of specific evenings, specific moods, specific moments when we needed something familiar and it was there. And it gave us the dark parts alongside the funny parts, because the dark parts are part of what we are too. We carry them. We sit with them at night when the world is quiet. We find them in the show we have always loved, named and seen and acknowledged. And for a moment, the carrying is easier. That is the gift, not the escape, though the escape is real and valid and needed. But the recognition, the sense that even the difficult things, even the dark things have been seen, have been held in someone's imagination with care, have been made through the alchemy of art into something bearable. The Simpsons has been on since December 17th, 1989. By any measure of time, it is ancient television. It will probably outlast most things made alongside it. And when people sit with it, years from now, in whatever form television takes by then, they will find what we have found tonight. A show that was funny and warm and bright yellow, and also, underneath all of that, completely honest about what it is to be alive. Completely honest about the darkness. And honest enough about the darkness to make the light that surrounds it mean something. The voice is going quieter now. The walk through Springfield is almost done. The houses are dark, and the street is empty, and Homer is on the couch, and Marge is upstairs, and Bart is asleep with his hands curled into fists, and Lisa is at her window with her saxophone, and Maggie is in her crib, watching, seeing everything, saying nothing. Springfield is still. The town that never ages is resting in the permanent present tense, in the amber of the show's long love for itself. And you are here, wherever here is, in the dark that belongs to you. Let the breath go. Let the body settle further into wherever it has settled. Let the images of Springfield soften and blur and become the texture of the space between waking and sleep. There is nowhere to be, there is nothing to do. The Springfield that has always been there will still be there in the morning. And so will you. You are still here. You are still in the world. And whatever it is you are carrying tonight, the grief or the worry or the longing or the simply tired weight of being a person who has been, being a person for some years now, you are carrying it, and the carrying continues, and that is enough. The carrying is enough. Being here, being present, letting a voice move through the quiet with you, that is enough. The show does not end. It just goes quiet for a while. And then it will be there again, on the couch, in the theme song, in the familiar bright world of the town that holds everyone and loses no one. Rest now. Springfield will be waiting. A note to carry with you, if you want it, from the dark heart of the most beloved cartoon ever made, the thing that Homer's plaque said, rearranged by love. Do it for them. Do it for the people you love. Do it for the version of yourself who is trying. And when that is not enough, do it anyway. Good night. Expansion. Deeper into Homer, the architecture of a broken man. There is a detail that the show drops in an early season and never fully returns to, but that changes everything if you hold it in mind while watching everything else. Homer Simpson went to college. Briefly, imperfectly, in a storyline that played mainly for comedy. Homer surrounded by students young enough to be his children. Homer confused by the simplest academic requirements. Homer navigating a world that was not designed for a man of his particular limitations. The episode is funny. The episode is also, if you look at it from a certain angle, one of the saddest things in the show's history. Because Homer wanted to go. He wanted the education. He enrolled not because anyone made him, not because circumstances demanded it, but because somewhere inside him there was still the shape of a person who wanted to be more than he had become. The aspiration was real. The reach was genuine. And the gap between the reach and the capability, the gap that the show played for comedy, that was genuinely funny in the ways the show played it, was also the gap that Homer had been living in his entire adult life. This is worth spending time with because it illuminates something central to who Homer is and why the show's treatment of him, at its best, transcended the comedy entirely. Homer is not simply stupid. This is the mistake that a surface reading of the show makes. Homer has been cognitively damaged by the crayon, by decades of the kind of environmental exposure the radiation theory addresses, by years of working in proximity to a reactor core with a safety culture best described as aspirational in its inadequacy. But underneath the damage, the show consistently, if intermittently, shows you the original shape of the thing. A man who is not without intelligence, but who has had that intelligence systematically dulled, who was not given the tools or the environment to develop it, who reached and was not met, who wanted and was not given. The tragedy of Homer Simpson is the tragedy of potential unfulfilled, not through laziness or choice, but through the accumulated weight of external forces that shaped him, before he had the capacity to resist them. He was formed by a town, by an employer, by an absence at the center of his childhood, by a community that rewarded compliance over curiosity, by a culture that told him his job was to show up and do what he was told, and find his joy in the approved places. The couch, the television, the donut, the beer. He did show up. He did find joy in the approved places. He built a life inside the parameters he was given, and inside those parameters he is, in the ways that count most, a success. He is loved. He loves. His family knows that he will come home. But the college episode, and the HOMR episode, and the episodes where Homer briefly finds his way to something more, these are the show's acknowledgement that the parameters were wrong, that something larger was possible, that the man on the couch, as warm and lovable as he is also a man who was prevented, by forces external to himself, from being everything he might have been. That is the dark current that runs under all the comedy. Not loud, not dramatic, just there. A bass note of what might have been, sounding continuously beneath the melody of what is. The nuclear power plant deserves more attention than we have given it, because it is not simply Homer's workplace. It is, in the show's symbolic vocabulary, the engine of Springfield's existence, the thing that powers everything, the thing that provides the jobs, the thing that holds the town together economically while potentially poisoning it physically. And Homer's position inside it, not simply as a worker, but as the safety inspector, the person whose nominal function is to prevent the thing from becoming catastrophic, is one of the show's most sustained and darkest jokes. The joke is, the least qualified person in the building is responsible for preventing disaster. And the disaster has not arrived. And it will not arrive because the show is a comedy, and disasters of that scale do not arrive in comedies. But the possibility of it is always there. The cracked cooling towers and the luminous waste and the donuts in the reactor core and Homer. Asleep at the console, these are the conditions for a catastrophe that the show perpetually defers. And in the deferral, in the perpetual not-quite disaster, there is something that looks less like reassurance and more like the specific anxiety of living adjacent to something dangerous that has not hurt you yet. The not yet is doing a lot of work. This is the reality of communities built around dangerous industries. The plant has not exploded. The water is still drinkable, mostly. The fish have 3 eyes, but the humans seem mostly fine or fine enough, or as fine as the comparison class of fine allows. The disaster is always potential and never actual, and the potential is always, always there. Homer goes to work every day knowing this and not knowing this in the way that Homer knows and doesn't know most things, with a kind of soft unawareness that is not stupidity exactly, but a trained incapacity for sustained alarm. He has been here long enough that the alarm has been domesticated. The luminous waste is just the waste. The cracked tower is just the tower. This is just how it is, here, in the place where he works, in the life he has. That soft unawareness, that trained incapacity for alarm in the face of the genuinely alarming, is not unique to Homer. It is human. It is the mechanism by which people live adjacent to unacceptable things and keep on living. We adapt to the present danger. We normalize the abnormal. We look at the three-eyed fish and say, well, that's Springfield for you, and then we go home for dinner. This is not a Simpsons problem. This is a human problem. And the show, by putting it inside a comedy, by making it the background of 36 years of entertainment, ensured that it would be absorbed as background rather than engaged as foreground. Which is, of course, exactly how the real thing works. Homer's health throughout the show is another dimension worth examining. He is hit by cars and falls from heights and survives explosions, and is electrocuted and poisoned and injured in ways that would kill any actual person. And he always recovers. This is cartoon physics, yes. But the show is self-aware enough to know what it is doing with this, and in the episodes that examine it directly, there is an implication. Homer's body, whatever has been done to it, has been changed into something that absorbs damage differently than a normal human body would. The episode where he is examined by doctors and found to have a layer of fat that protects his organs, used comedically, of course, is also in the show's larger symbolic vocabulary, a statement about Homer's relationship to harm. He is insulated, not safe. The harm reaches him, all of it, but at a remove. The immediate physical harm bounces off him, the deeper harm, the kind that does not have a physical form. The absence of his mother, the damage of his employment, the specific loneliness of being Homer in a world that is always slightly too small. That harm does reach him. He carries it, in the silt of his personality, in the moments when the comedy pauses and the expression on his face is the expression of a man standing at a kitchen window in the dark. The fat is literal comedy. The insulation from harm is something else. It is a description of how people survive the unsurvivable. Not by not being hurt, but by being built, for reasons they did not choose, in ways that make the hurt survivable. Homer survives because he was made to survive. Whether he was made to survive by fate or by genetics or by the specific kind of mutation that 30 years of nuclear proximity can produce in the human organism, the show leaves open. But the survival is consistent, and the costs of the survival are visible in everything else the show shows us about him. He is alive. He is, by the measures available to him, living. The life is real and warm and funny and full of love. And underneath it, running always, the bass note. What he could have been. What was taken. What the plan and the town and the system and the crayon and the absence of Mona Simpson combined to prevent. He is Homer. He will always be Homer. And Homer is, the show tells us in its darkest moments, enough. More than enough, the only thing. The thing worth dreaming about if you are ever, someday, somewhere, lying in a bed with your eyes closed and the world outside going on without you. But he was also more once in the space of what might have been, and the show has never quite forgotten that. And neither, watching it, do we. Expansion. Marge deeper. The labor of being the strong one. Let us return to Marge, because the first pass was not quite long enough. Marge deserves the length. The specific labor of being the strong one in a family is invisible labor. This is by design. Not malicious design, but the structural inevitability of a role that exists precisely because it functions without being noticed. If the strong one made their strength visible, made it a demand or an accounting or a reckoning, the dynamic would change. The family would have to reorganize around the new visibility. The balance would shift. Marge does not do this. Marge absorbed early and has never fully unabsorbed. The lesson that her strength is most useful when it is most invisible. That the good functioning of the household, the meals, the managed children, the emotional weather kept manageable, the crises absorbed before they became disasters, should feel effortless, should seem to happen by itself, should not require thanks because acknowledgement would make it visible and visibility would make it a transaction. And she does not want it to be a transaction. She wants it to be love. It is love. That is the other side of it, the side that keeps Marge from being a tragic figure in the unambiguous sense. The care she gives is genuine, not performative. The dinners are made with love. The children managed with love. The Homer absorbed with love in the full, complicated sense of a love that sees its object clearly and chooses it anyway. She is not a martyr. She is a woman who loves her family and expresses that love through action and presence and the particular kind of attention that keeps things from going wrong before they get the chance. But the invisibility of the labor costs her, and the episodes that show this cost by Mike Gay that catch Marge in the gap between what she gives and what she receives are doing something important. They are naming the cost without demanding that the love be withdrawn. They are saying, this is hard, and she does it hard, and the hardness is real. There is an episode where Marge has a midlife crisis, or the closest thing to a midlife crisis that the show's frozen timeline will allow. She picks up a hobby, or a pursuit, or some channel for the energy that has been running entirely in the direction of her family and has found no outlet for itself. The hobby matters less than what it reveals, that Marge has a self that is separate from her family self, has desires and interests and drives that are entirely her own, has been holding this self carefully in reserve while the family self occupied all the available space. The hobby gives her a place to put the self that is hers, and she is good at it, whatever it is. Marge is almost always good at the things she applies herself to, which is part of the show's ongoing argument about what the domestic life she chose has contained and concealed. There is a capable, inventive, excellent Marge who emerges when the circumstances allow, and the circumstances only rarely allow. The family reacts to this new Marge with a mixture of delight and confusion, and, in Homer's case, a degree of displacement anxiety that the show plays for comedy, but that is also real. When the person whose function has been to center you starts to have a center of her own, the adjustment is not always easy. The self that is hers requires space, and space in the Simpson household is a finite resource. This is not an argument that Marge should leave her family, or that her family is bad, or that the domestic life is inherently diminishing. The show never makes this argument, and neither do I. It is an argument for visibility, for the acknowledgement that the strong one's strength is not free, that it comes from somewhere and goes to somewhere, and that the going to somewhere should include, sometimes, the strong one herself. The episode where Marge gets therapy is the most direct version of this. She sits across from a therapist and she begins to talk about her life, and what she discovers in the talking is not that her life is wrong, but that she has been holding it entirely on her own terms, the terms of the role she has played, and that there is a Marge inside the role who has things to say that the role does not make room for. The therapist is sympathetic and perceptive in the way that good therapists are sympathetic and perceptive, not fixing, not prescribing, just listening in a way that makes speech possible. And what the speech reveals, in its circling, tentative way, is the interior life of a woman who has been performing containment so long that she has forgotten, sometimes, what she is containing. She is containing love and fear, and the specific anxiety of a person who has accepted responsibility for everything and therefore lives with the constant awareness that everything could go wrong. The worry is not irrational. The things she worries about are real. Homer is genuinely prone to catastrophe. Bart is genuinely inclined toward behavior that could have consequences. Lisa is genuinely struggling. The family is genuinely fragile in the way that all families are genuinely fragile, held together by habits and love and inertia and the daily choosing of each other over the alternatives. But the weight of the awareness, the weight of being the person who holds the awareness, that is Marge's specific burden. She cannot put it down. She would not know how, even if someone told her she was allowed to. That is the darkness in Marge's life. Not dramatic darkness, not the darkness of obvious suffering. The quiet darkness of a woman who has given herself so thoroughly to the project of her family that the line between herself and the project has become hard to find. The blue hair is a visual metaphor that the show rarely makes explicit, but that sits in the background of every Marge scene if you are paying attention. That hair, the impossible tower of blue defying gravity, unchanging across decades, is the most obvious visible evidence of something about Marge that the show is always implying. She is constructed, maintained. She does not simply exist. She is held in a shape through enormous daily effort. The hair is the performance made visible, the aspiration towards some platonic Marge that she works to approximate every morning in the house before the family wakes. What Marge looks like when she is not performing, when the hair is down, when the maintenance is dropped, when she is simply herself without the effort of being herself, is one of the great unanswered questions of the show. We get glimpses. In the episodes where she is sick or exhausted or overwhelmed to the point of temporary collapse. In those glimpses, she looks different. She looks without the construction like a person who is tired in the real and persistent way. Tired in the bone. She always puts the hair back up. She always resumes. That is Marge. That has always been Marge, the resuming. The return to the shape she has decided is hers. Not reluctantly, not under compulsion, but with the genuine love of a woman who believes in the life she has chosen and will choose it again tomorrow and the day after. But we are allowed to notice the tired beneath the choosing. We are allowed to see it in the episodes that look and to hold it with care. The labor is real. The love is real. Both things are true simultaneously in the same blue-haired woman in the same yellow kitchen on the same evergreen terrace that has been the center of the show's universe for 36 years. She stands at the stove and she is magnificent and she is exhausted and she is loved. All of it. All at once. That is Marge. Expansion. The weight of being Lisa. Going deeper. We have talked about Lisa's intelligence and her isolation and the episode with Mr. Bergstrom and the note. We have traced the saxophone to its emotional source. But there is more, and the more is important, and it is worth the time. Lisa Simpson is the show's ongoing argument against the idea that giftedness is uncomplicated. The culture around giftedness, the school programs, the parental pride, the early identification and acceleration and special treatment, tends to treat intelligence as purely positive, as something to be developed and celebrated and pointed toward success. The gifted child is the one who will thrive, the one who has already been given the most important thing, the one for whom the future holds the most possibility. Lisa does not experience her intelligence this way. She experiences it as a weight. Not always, there are moments when it lifts her, when it carries her to places that are genuinely wonderful, when the pleasure of thinking clearly and deeply and with real precision is its own reward. These moments exist and they matter, and the show does not deny them. But more often, what Lisa's intelligence gives her is more of the world than she has the resources to process. More information, more awareness, more feeling. Not simply emotion, but the kind of effective responsiveness to reality that means that suffering, when she encounters it, reaches her more fully than it reaches people whose processing is less acute. She feels more. This is the gift and the burden simultaneously, inseparable. The episode where Lisa discovers that her favorite musician, someone she has idolized and taken seriously and used as evidence that her taste and her standards are not wrong, has had feet of clay, has been, in some significant way, not what she believed, is an episode about what it costs to care about things fully, to invest, to believe with the whole of yourself in the quality and the value of something. When the thing disappoints, the full investment comes due. The disappointment is proportional to the investment. The crash is as high as the elevation was. Lisa crashes, in episodes like this, in proportion to her investment. And her investments are enormous because she does not know how to care partially. She is constitutionally incapable of the protective detachment that lets people enjoy things without fully committing to them. She commits. She cares completely. And the caring completely is, across the long run of the show, a source of repeated pain. The show loves her for it. In the episodes that are most clearly in Lisa's corner, and there are many because the writers of the show have always had a visible tenderness toward her, the full-hearted caring is presented as her essential quality. The thing that makes her extraordinary. The thing that, in the world outside Springfield, in the future that the show can imagine but not show, will make her someone who matters. But in Springfield, in the permanent present of the show's frozen timeline, the caring completely mostly means being hurt, being disappointed, running up against the limits of the world around her again and again, and caring about those limits in full proportion to the hopes that they disappoint. Lisa's veganism, her environmental activism, her ethical concerns, The show sometimes plays these for comedy, using Lisa's intensity as the setup for jokes about earnestness and idealism. But underneath the comedy, the show takes her seriously. It knows that she is right about the things she is right about. It knows that the meat is what she thinks it is, and the environment is as fragile as she says it is, and the injustices she points at are real. It does not undercut her positions. What it does, instead, is show her the world's resistance to those positions. The world does not change because Lisa sees clearly. The world continues being the world, messy, compromised, operating on logics that are not hers, organized around interests that do not include the truth as she understands it. And Lisa, who sees clearly and cares completely, has to keep seeing and caring in the face of this resistance. That is an enormous amount to ask of an 8-year-old. That is actually an enormous amount to ask of anyone. The question the show never quite answers is whether Lisa will be broken by this. Whether the resistance will wear her down, whether the caring will eventually become too costly and she will learn, as so many people learn, to care less, to protect herself, to build the kind of detachment that makes the world bearable at the price of making it less fully felt. Or whether she will not learn this. Whether she will remain the full-hearted, caring, impossible Lisa through everything, all the way to the future the show imagines but doesn't show. We see a glimpse of that future in Lisa's wedding, the episode that flashes forward to Lisa as a young adult, engaged, living a life that looks from the outside like triumph, but that from the inside is still, recognizably, the Lisa who is too awake for her own comfort. She is still too aware, still too in contact, still, in the most fundamental sense, herself. And that is the show's answer, in that episode, to the question of what happens to Lisa. She remains Lisa. The world does not diminish her. The costs are real and she bears them, and she is still, at the end of the bearing, fully herself. That is an act of love from the show toward this character. A declaration that the full-heartedness will survive, that the caring will not be broken, that Lisa Simpson, wherever she ends up in the world, she can access once the frozen timeline unfreezes, will still be exactly who she is. She is 8 years old. She is at the window. The saxophone plays something that has no name. She is, as the note said, Lisa Simpson. And that is enough. That has always been enough. That is more than enough. Expansion. Springfield in America. The longer picture. Let us pull back now. Let us climb to a higher vantage point and look at Springfield not as a collection of characters and episodes, but as a place, as the fictional America that the show built over 36 years and populated with everything it knew. Springfield, at its most ambitious, is a portrait of what America looked like from the inside during the last years of the 20th century and the first decades of the 21st. Not a documentary portrait, the comedy and the sire and the cartoon physics ensure that, but a portrait in the way that all art is a portrait, selective, interpretive, shaped by the vision and the values of the people who made it, and truer in its way than the documentary would be. What did America look like from the inside in those years? It looked like Springfield. It looked like a place of real warmth, communities of people who knew each other, who showed up for each other in the ways that mattered, who argued and competed and held grudges, and also, when the moment required it, arrived. The warmth of Springfield is the warmth of the American town at its best. The neighbors in the driveway, the church potluck, the children running through the summer evening without worry. This exists. This is real. The show captured it because the writers knew it, had lived in versions of it, understood what it was. And it looked like a place where the warmth was always under pressure. The pressure came from the economics, from the single employer, the company town, the perpetual awareness that the thing that held everything together was owned by someone who did not ultimately care about the things it was holding together. From the political culture, the mayor who is corrupt not dramatically but ordinarily, in the grinding daily way that local governance is often corrupt, through small favors and smaller accountabilities, and the general tendency of institutions to serve the people inside them. From the environmental reality, the plant, the pollution, the three-eyed fish that everyone saw and no one quite addressed. The pressure is not acute. That is the specific texture of this kind of pressure. It is not a crisis that demands resolution. It is a condition that demands accommodation. You live with it. You adjust. You lower the threshold for alarm until the alarm no longer sounds. And you go on because going on is what people do. The Simpsons documented this going on. For 36 years, it documented the texture of American life in the mode of accommodation. The accommodation to economic precarity, to environmental damage, to political failure, to the specific American tendency to choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, to prefer the version of reality that allows for the continuation of normal life over the version that demands something be done. This is not a critique, or it is a critique, but it is a sympathetic critique, the critique of a show that loves the people it is describing. The people of Springfield are not to blame for the conditions they live inside. They did not build the plant. They did not create the corruption. They did not choose the economic structure that makes them dependent on Burns and his cracked cooling towers. They are inside a system, and the system is larger than they are. And the best they can do is be good to each other while the system does what it does. And they are often good to each other. The show is insistent about this. For all the corruption and the pollution and the collective denial and the mob mentality and the moments when Springfield fails its residents spectacularly, for all of this, the show always returns to the warmth. The neighbor at the door with a casserole. The town that shows up when the showing up matters. The Flanders who offers help before being asked. The Homer who, in his way, is almost always trying. This is the complexity that makes the show more than satire. It is not saying these people are pathetic, look at what they tolerate. It is saying these people are doing their best in conditions that make the best difficult, and their best is often beautiful, and we should see both things at once. America has been doing its best in conditions that make the best difficult for a long time. The conditions are real. The effort is also real. The Simpsons held both in its cartoon hands and said, both of these are true and neither cancels the other, and anyone who tells you the story is simple is not looking carefully enough. The predictions the show made, the ones that came true, the ones the internet found and screenshotted and shared, are less interesting as prophecy than as diagnosis. The writers were not predicting, they were describing. They were taking the tendencies they could see in 1992 or 1996 or 1999 and following them forward with the logic of satire, which is the logic of taking something real and pressing it in the direction it is already going until it becomes impossible to ignore. Trump was always there in the logic of celebrity politics, in the tendency to prefer the entertaining over the qualified, in the American willingness to vote for the person who makes you feel something over the person who knows what they are doing. The Disney merger was always there in the logic of media consolidation, in the tendency of capital to accumulate toward monopoly. The smartphone was always there in the trajectory of miniaturization, in the logic of making every tool personal and portable and present. The writers saw these logics, they followed them, the outcomes arrived. And the show was there first, not because it was magic, but because it was paying attention in the way that great comedy always pays attention, to the gap between what things say they are and what they actually are, and to the direction that gap is moving. Springfield is America. This is the show's foundational claim, and it has never stopped being true. The yellow skin is a dye that runs over everything. The four fingers are a shorthand for the human hand, simplified but still reaching. The cracked cooling tower is every industrial liability that every American town has been asked to accommodate in exchange for the jobs. The Homer is every American who wanted more and got what he got and kept going. We built Springfield because Springfield needed to be built, because the America that exists needed a mirror, and the mirror needed to be funny enough that we would look at it and warm enough that we would not look away. The show gave us that mirror. For 36 years, it held it up, and what we saw reflected back was us. All of us. Yellow and imperfect and alive. Expansion. The episodes that exist. Outside the comedy. The show's purest moments. There is a quality of certain Simpsons episodes that is difficult to name and impossible to mistake when you encounter it. A stillness. A sense that the show has stepped outside its own format, has set down the comedy machinery for a moment, and is simply present, attending, looking at something directly without the refraction of the joke. These episodes are not common. The show is, by nature and by format, and by the demands of 22 minutes on a broadcast network, a comedy. It has to be. The machinery of the comedy is real and necessary, and the show cannot survive on pure emotion any more than pure emotion can survive without the leavening of humor. But in the episodes where the stillness arrives, the show reaches a register that almost no other program on commercial television has managed to reach. Not at that scale, not with that reliability, not with that care. The episode where Homer drives a red convertible with his friend who is dying and does not know it yet. The drive itself is the episode. The two men on the road, Homer not understanding what the journey is about, the friend understanding everything, the miles going by, the country opening around them, something happening between them that neither one will name but that is present in every frame. When the episode ends and the friend is gone and Homer slowly understands what he was part of, the grief arrives late, but it arrives complete. The show gave you the whole of it before you knew what you were being given. The Bart Gets an F episode we discussed earlier earns its place here not simply for the crying scene, but for the full shape of it. The way the episode builds the portrait of a child trying, really trying, with nothing held back, and the way the emotion at the end is proportional to that portrait. The crying is not sudden, it is earned. You have been watching the trying for 18 minutes, and when the trying fails and the tears come, they come as the culmination of everything. There is nowhere else for the feeling to go. The episode Homer's Barbershop Quartet is lighter in tone than the darkest episodes, but has a quality of beauty and of time that the show's stillness episodes share. Homer had a past before the show, a version of himself that existed before the permanent present tense, a Homer who was young and had possibilities that were still open. The episode touches this with a delicacy that is unusual for the show. It does not make the past sad. It makes it present, which is a different kind of sadness. The sadness of a past that was real and is now genuinely over. That has become memory rather than life. That can be visited but not lived in. Homer tells the story of the B Sharps with the pride and the nostalgia of a man who did something once that mattered and that is now finished. The finishing is not tragic. It is the ordinary tragedy of time. The things we did and then stopped doing. The versions of ourselves we inhabited and then outgrew. The people we were in the company of others who are now somewhere else or nowhere at all. The show found room for this, in the middle of its comedy, because the show understood that ordinary loss is loss, and ordinary nostalgia is real, and the man on the couch has a past as well as a present, and both of them belong to him. And then there's the episode called Mother Simpson, which we have discussed, but which deserves this further visit. The final image. Homer alone on the hood of his car, watching the stars, after his mother has fled again and the family has gone inside. No dialogue, no comedy, just Homer under the sky, looking up at something that is too large to name and too real to ignore. The shot holds for a long time, longer than is comfortable, longer than any other shot in any episode of the show holds. The production team apparently debated cutting it, but it stayed. It stayed because it was right. Because this was the correct amount of time to spend with Homer in this moment. Because the feeling the shot was carrying required the time. He sits under the stars and his mother is gone and the stars are indifferent and the night is very large and he is very small inside it. That image is the show at its most honest. No language, no joke. Just the fact of a person who is sad in a universe that doesn't respond to sadness. And then the credits rolled. The courage of that ending. The courage to end without comfort, without the reset, without the joke that would have made it bearable in the way that jokes make things bearable, is not something that network television produces often. The show took the risk. It made Homer sit under those stars for the full length of the feeling. And the audience, sitting in their own homes, felt it. Whatever they were carrying that was similar, whatever version of that sitting under indifferent stars they had done or would do, found a shape in Homer's shape, a form in Homer's form. He was there so they could be there too. He was sad, so their sadness could locate itself in something that acknowledged it. That is the gift. That is the specific gift that the darkest and stillest and most honest episodes of The Simpsons gave, and keep giving and will give to anyone who finds them in the right moment. Expansion. Maggie's silence. The deepest patient intelligence in Springfield. We discussed Maggie, but there is a dimension we did not fully enter. The silence. Not the mechanics of it. We examined those, the theory that the silence is strategic, the intelligence behind the choice not to speak, but the deeper meaning of it. The spiritual dimension, if you will, of a character who has been present for the entire run of the show and has chosen, consistently, to be present without language. Language is how the show's characters interact with each other and with the world. Homer's verbal comedy, Marge's careful articulation, Bart's quick banter, Lisa's eloquence. Language is the medium through which Springfield's characters are themselves, through which they are known. Maggie knows without language. She understands without speaking. She sees without the mediation of words. And in a show as dense with language as The Simpsons, a show that is fundamentally a verbal comedy, built on the line, the exchange, the timing of speech, Maggie's silence is not absence. It is presence of a different kind. She is the observer, the witness, the one who is there while everyone else is performing, who absorbs while everyone else expends, who accumulates knowledge while everyone else depletes it in the transaction of speech. What Maggie knows, what she has gathered across 36 years of witnessing the Simpson family and Springfield and everything that happens in and around both, is unknowable to us because she has chosen not to speak it. This is both the comedy of the character and, in the show's more thoughtful registers, the depth of it. A person who sees everything and says nothing is either a person with nothing to say or a person who has decided that what they have to say is worth keeping. Maggie is not empty. The show has too consistently demonstrated her intelligence and her capability for the emptiness to be the explanation. What she has to say, what she knows, what she has concluded from 36 years of attentive witness, is being held. For what? The show has never answered this. The show may never answer this. And the unanswered question is more interesting than most answers would be, because the unanswered question opens onto everything, onto the full scope of what a fully witnessing intelligence would conclude about the Simpson family and Springfield and the America they are set inside. What would you conclude if you watched all of it and felt all of it and were too young to have been formed by any of it? What would you know? Maggie knows. She is not saying. This is the most intriguing mystery in a show full of mysteries, because it is the one that points outward rather than inward. The radiation theory and the coma theory and the who shot Burns mystery. These are mysteries about Springfield's internal logic. Maggie's silence is a mystery about meaning, about what it would mean to see everything clearly, to understand it all, and then to wait. What are you waiting for, Maggie? The show does not say. The pacifier moves in the final shot of one of the show's great mysteries, and the mouth curves into something that might be a smile, and the room is empty and quiet, and Maggie sees. She always sees. And someday, the show suggests, someday in a future it will never actually show us. In a Springfield that is not frozen, in a world where the timeline has unfrozen, and the children have grown and the story has moved past the amber, someday Maggie Simpson will speak. And it will mean something. Expansion. The aesthetic of the ordinary, why Springfield looks the way it does. The art style of The Simpsons is not neutral. Nothing is. The yellow skin, the four fingers, the bulging eyes, the simplified anatomy, these are choices, made early, that have become so familiar as to be nearly invisible. We no longer see the choices. We see Springfield. We see the characters. The style has dissolved into the thing it depicts, the way good prose dissolves into the story it tells. But the choices are there, underneath the familiarity, and they say things. The yellow skin is the one most often discussed. It reads in certain critical lights as racially coded, a shorthand for whiteness that operates differently from the realistic flesh tones of a live-action show. But it also reads, in the show's own symbolic vocabulary, as something else, as a uniform. Every resident of Springfield is the same color, regardless of any other characteristic. The yellow is the Springfield of it. To be yellow is to be from here, to be of this place, to be one of the towns. The guest characters who come to Springfield from outside are drawn differently, more realistically, more varied, identifiable as outsiders by their visual distinctness. They are from somewhere else. The yellow ones are from here. This is a kind of equality, however accidental. The Springfield palette admits no visible hierarchy of skin. Its hierarchy is economic and social, expressed through houses and cars and the contrast between Burns's mansion and the houses on Evergreen Terrace. But visually, on the surface of the image, everyone is the same color. The four fingers are a practical choice, easier to animate, that has acquired its own meaning through decades of association. Four fingers instead of five. Not quite human. A reduction, a simplification, a cartoon shorthand for a hand that is human in function but not in fact. Every character in Springfield, regardless of wealth or intelligence or moral standing, has four fingers. Burns and Homer and Lisa and Maggie and Ned and everyone, four fingers, the same shorthand for the same simplified humanity. The simplification is, in a way, the point. These are not people. They are what you make when you try to render people in the most economical, most immediate, most essential form. They are the idea of people, the emotional core of people, stripped of the realistic surface. What's left when you remove the realistic surface is, in the best episodes, in the moments when the show is most itself, the truth. The animation of the golden seasons has a quality that later seasons have not maintained. And the loss is partly economic, and partly technical, and partly the inevitable effect of 36 years of production on the specific sensibility that informed the earliest work. But in those early seasons, in the second and third and fourth and fifth, there is an expressiveness to the faces and the bodies that goes beyond what the simple style should allow. Homer's expression in the kitchen window scene, Bart's face when the tears come, Lisa at the window with the saxophone. These faces, in those moments, do not look like cartoons. They look like feeling. They look like the direct rendering of an interior state in a visual form, bypassing the usual translation and arriving, for a moment, completely. That is what the best animation does. That is what the best of The Simpsons did, and does, and will continue to do for anyone who finds the right episode at the right moment and sees it as it was meant to be seen. The music is the other dimension of this. Alf Clausen's score, the long-running musical foundation of the show, is one of the unsung achievements of American television. It is orchestral and witty and emotionally intelligent in a way that comedy scores rarely are. It knows when to support the comedy and when to get out of the way and when, in the still moments, to carry feelings that the image alone cannot bear. In the Homer Under the Stars shot at the end of Mother Simpson, the music does something remarkable. It does almost nothing. It is there very quietly, like a breath. Not leading the emotion, not amplifying it, not telling you how to feel. Just present the way a person is present at a bedside. Not speaking, not doing, just being there. That restraint is rarer than the flourish. It is harder. And in that final image, Homer small under the enormous indifferent sky, the music's restraint says the truest thing music can say. This is too large for sound. We are here with you in the silence. Expansion. The long goodbye. What it means that the show will eventually end. Every show ends. This is the true thing that The Simpsons has been deferring for 36 years. And that deference is, as we have explored, itself a statement about something. About our relationship to the things we love. About our unwillingness to let go. About the specific comfort of the familiar that keeps going. But every show ends. Somewhere in a future that is approaching at the ordinary speed of time, the last episode of The Simpsons will air. The credits will roll for the final time. The theme will play and then stop and not play again in its proper context, and the family will be where they are on the couch, and the screen will go dark. What will it mean when that happens? It will mean, practically, that one of the longest-running creative projects in American television history has concluded, that a show which debuted when many of its current audience members were not yet born has reached the end of its run, that something enormous has closed. But it will also mean something less practical, something harder to put in the language of practical things. It will mean that the permanent present tense has ended, that Springfield has entered the past tense definitively for the first time in its existence. That Bart is still 10 years old, and Lisa is still 8, and Maggie still has her pacifier, and they will be those ages now forever. Not because the show is still running and the timeline is still floating, but because the show is over and the characters have been fixed at those ages the way all finished things are fixed. It will mean that we have to let go. Not of the episodes. Those remain available, watchable, the archive of a creative life that spans most of a lifetime. But of the ongoing project, of the sense that there is always more. That next week, there will be another episode, and the week after another, and Springfield will always be continuing. When the show ends, we will have the complete thing. All of it from the first rough Tracy Ullman segments to whatever the final episode turns out to be. And we will be able to do what we do with complete things. Hold them, return to them, understand them as wholes rather than as ongoing emergences. But we will also have lost the ongoing quality, the companion quality, the sense that the show is still here, still going, still sending up new episodes from the place where it has always been. The show as companion is different from the show as archive. The companion has a presence. The archive has a past. This is why the ending, whenever it comes, will be mourned more than most endings. Not simply because The Simpsons is beloved. Many beloved shows end without the mourning reaching the depth this one will likely reach. But because The Simpsons has been a companion for so long, to so many people, through so much of their lives, that its ending will feel like a personal loss in a way that is unusual for a piece of media. People will lose Homer, not the fictional Homer, but he will always exist in reruns and streaming and the archive. But the Homer who was still going, the Homer who was still there, still showing up, still on the couch, still stumbling through a new week's worth of Springfield. The ongoing Homer, the companion Homer, and they will lose Springfield as a living place. It will become a historical place, a place that existed, a place that mattered, a place that is now finished. The present tense will become the past tense, and the past tense is always a little sad, however beautiful the thing it describes. But here is what will remain: the dark scenes, the still moments, the Homer under the stars and the Lisa at the window, and the Marge who says, "Don't smile if you don't feel it. Don't smile for anyone. Your feelings are yours, and they belong to you." The Bart who cried when he actually tried. The Burns who dreamed of his mother. The Ned who forgives and forgives and forgives because he does not know how not to. These will remain as they have always been: honest, present, carrying real weight in the way that real things carry real weight. Undiminished by time because time does not diminish truth in the way it diminishes novelty. The truths the show told will still be true when the last episode airs and the credits roll for the last time and Springfield goes into its permanent past tense. They will still be true because they were always true. The show did not invent the truth of Homer's longing, or Lisa's isolation, or Marge's invisible labor. It found these truths in the world and rendered them, with care and with love, in a form that millions of people could receive. That is what art does. That is all art has ever done. And when the show ends, the art remains. The archive remains. The episodes remain. Whenever someone needs them, at 3 in the morning, on a sleepless night, in the quiet dark, when the world is too much, and they need something that knows what it is to be a person living in the complicated ordinary. The episodes will be there. Homer will be there. The couch will be there. The theme will play. And for 22 minutes, Springfield will be present tense again. The timeline will float again. The family will be exactly where they were, exactly who they are, exactly as imperfect and warm and real as they have always been. That is the gift that will outlast the show. The gift that is already waiting in the archive for anyone who needs it, at any hour, for any reason. The long goodbye is not actually a goodbye. It is the beginning of a different kind of presence. The presence of the finished thing, the completed work, the full arc of a creative life that spent 36 years paying careful, loving, honest attention to ordinary American life and finding it worthy of the attention. The Simpsons paid attention. And in paying attention, it did what the highest human endeavors try to do. It said to the ordinary, overlooked, imperfect, aching lives inside its frame and outside it, "You matter. This matters." The difficulty and the love and the failing and the trying and the returning home, all of it, all of this matters. Rest now. The story is still going. The archive is still there. And somewhere in Springfield, Homer is on the couch, and the television is on, and the family is home, and the beer is cold, and the night is quiet. It will always be like this, somewhere. That is enough. It has always been more than enough. Coda. everything the show was trying to tell you. A voice in the dark, a quiet hour, a show that has been with you longer than almost anything else in your cultural life. We have moved through the whole of it tonight, or as much of it as a voice can carry in one sitting, in one long, slow walk through the episodes and the years and the truths underneath the comedy. What does it add up to? It adds up to a portrait of ordinary American life that is honest about the difficulty and honest about the love and refuses to let either one cancel the other. It adds up to a family that is imperfect in every way that families are imperfect and whole in every way that families are whole. It adds up to a town that is broken and beloved and deeply, irrevocably itself. It adds up to Homer, who wanted more and got what he got and loved it as best he could, who chose the fog when the clarity was unbearable, who sat under the stars when there was nothing else to do, who came home every episode to the couch and the family and the ordinary, extraordinary life of a man who was built by a difficult world and is still, somehow, still here. It adds up to Marge, who held everything together and paid the price of the holding, and would pay it again, would always pay it again, because the family at the center of all that holding is worth the cost. It adds up to Bart, who built his armor so early and so well that he has sometimes forgotten there is something alive inside it, something that cries when it actually tries and loves its sister and reaches for its father's approval in the sideways way of a person who has learned that reaching directly gets you nowhere. It adds up to Lisa, who is too awake and too caring and too in contact with everything, who plays the saxophone at the window in the Springfield dusk, who carries the note in her pocket that says, "You are Lisa Simpson. You are the answer to the question you are asking." It adds up to all of them. The whole yellow family in the whole yellow town, living their imperfect lives in the permanent present tense, frozen by our love and by the show's love into the amber of an eternal Sunday evening. We pressed pause in 1989, and here we still are, watching, loving, returning. Because the show that made us laugh also made us feel. Because the family we laughed at was also always ourselves. Because Springfield, however strange, however impossible, however yellow, was always America, was always the town we grew up in, or the town next to the town we grew up in, or the town we could see from the window of the town we grew up in. Because Homer is us, and we love him. And in loving him, we love something true about what we are, flawed and reaching and warm and exhausted and trying, always trying to get back to the couch, to the family, to the place that is ours. The voice is going quiet now. You have been here long enough. Your body knows what it needs. The breath has slowed. The weight of the day has distributed itself into the surface beneath you. Let the images of Springfield drift. Let Homer's face soften into the general dark. Let the saxophone become part of the quiet. Let the whole enormous, warm, complicated, imperfect thing dissolve into the space between waking and sleep. You are in your own evergreen terrace, wherever it is, your own corner of the world. It is enough. You are enough. Good night. End. Expansion. The episodes that changed how people thought about animation. Before The Simpsons, the prevailing wisdom in network television was that animation was for children. It was a Saturday morning format, a weekday afternoon format, the format of talking animals and superheroes and educational content designed for minds that had not yet developed the sophistication required for live-action drama and comedy. The Simpsons broke this assumption so completely, so quickly, and so thoroughly that it is now difficult to remember the world in which the assumption existed. The show did not simply demonstrate that animation could be for adults. It demonstrated that animation could do things that live action could not, could create a visual logic that was simultaneously more absurdist and more emotionally direct than the realistic image, could carry both comedy and pathos in ways that the constraints of the real world prevented, could achieve a kind of truth through unreality that the realistic image, burdened by its own reality, was unable to reach. This is the formal dimension of why the dark scenes in The Simpsons land the way they do. The medium amplifies them. When Homer sits under the stars at the end of Mother Simpson, the image carries a weight that a live-action equivalent would not quite match. Part of this is the simplicity. The cartoon Homer is a more essential figure than any actor could be, a more direct rendering of the type. His grief is the grief of every man rather than the grief of one specific face. We can put ourselves into the cartoon Homer in a way that the presence of an actor prevents. The actor's face is their face, Homer's face is ours. When Lisa plays the saxophone at the window, the blue light and the simplified skyline of Springfield create an atmosphere that is both specific and universal. Springfield is everywhere, and the window is any window, and the music reaches anywhere music reaches. A live-action equivalent would be beautiful in its own way, but it would be particularized. This girl, this window, this evening. The cartoon is less particular and therefore more general. And more general means more available to the audience's own experience of being alone with something they feel and cannot say. This formal property of animation, its capacity for the essential over the particular, is what the best Simpsons episodes use most fully. The dark scenes are dark in the way that the deepest things are dark. Not because they are specific to one person's experience, but because they touch something structural about being human. The loss of a parent, the failure of potential, the labor of love in the long form, the weight of being too awake in a world not built for the awake. These are not niche experiences. These are the textures of ordinary life, and the cartoon form makes them available to everyone who has lived those textures, without the particularity of one specific face getting in the way. The Simpsons taught an entire generation that animation was a form capable of this kind of depth. It created the conditions for everything that followed, for the adult animated dramas and comedies that filled the decades after its debut, for the expansion of the form into territories that television had previously reserved for live action. It opened a door that has never closed, and it opened that door by being honest. By taking its characters seriously enough to make them feel things, and by trusting its audience enough to show them those feelings without flinching. That was the revolution, not the technical innovation, not the celebrity guest appearances, not the prediction of future events. The revolution was taking a cartoon family seriously, believing that the yellow people on the screen were worth caring about, believing that the audience was worth being honest with. Everything followed from that. Expansion, Ned Flanders, the Saint, and his prison. We touched on Ned in the section on side characters, but Ned deserves a fuller accounting because Ned is not a side character in the thematic sense. Ned is, in many ways, the show's central moral argument, not Homer, who is the heart, but Ned, who is the test. The test is this: what happens to goodness in a system that does not reward it? Ned Flanders is the best person in Springfield by almost every measurable standard. He is charitable, genuinely, not performatively charitable. The kind of charitable that gives without needing to be seen giving. He is kind, reliably, consistently kind, in the everyday interactions that reveal character more accurately than the dramatic moments. He is present for his children, attentive to his community, available to his neighbors. He is, in the language that his faith provides for these things, a good man, and the show punishes him. Consistently, reliably, without apparent malice but also without mercy. His wife dies. His house is destroyed. His neighbor takes and never gives back. His faith is sincere and his God is not reliably there. He does everything right in a universe that does not keep score. This could be the show simply being cynical, using Ned's goodness as a target, finding humor in the gap between virtue and reward. And it is sometimes this, in the lazy episodes, in the ones that use Ned as a setup without thinking about what the setup mean. But in the episodes that think about it, the ones that take Ned seriously, something more interesting is happening. The show is not saying that goodness is foolish or that virtue is naive. It is saying something harder, that goodness must be its own reward because the universe is not arranged to provide another one. That virtue, if it is real, must survive the discovery that it will not be compensated. That faith, if it is genuine, must persist through the silence. Ned's faith persists through the silence. This is either his greatest strength or his greatest prison, depending on how you look at it. The faith that keeps him upright through Maud's death and the destroyed house and the Homer who will never be the neighbor Ned deserves, that faith is the thing that keeps him from disintegrating. But it is also the thing that prevents him from asking the question that his circumstances most clearly invite. Why? Why me? Why, if goodness matters, does goodness cost this much? He doesn't ask it. He is not constitutionally capable of asking it. The childhood conditioning that removed his anger also removed, or at least constrained, his capacity for that specific, confrontational questioning of the divine. He can feel the pain. He cannot direct it upward in the way that pain sometimes needs to be directed. God talks to Homer, not Ned. Homer, who sleeps through sermons and uses faith as a cover for convenience and has the theological commitment of a man who believes in God the way he believes in the sports team, enthusiastically and without consistency. God shows up for Homer. Homer has face-to-face conversations with the divine on multiple occasions. And Ned, who has organized his entire life around the faith, who gets up every morning and makes the first gesture of the day a gesture toward the God he believes in, who interprets every loss as part of a plan he cannot see but trust. Ned gets silence. The show never explains this. It never addresses it directly. It simply presents it as a fact of Springfield's reality. The universe of the show favors Homer. This is, among other things, a statement about how the world actually distributes its favors. Not according to merit, not according to effort, not according to the quality of the person's moral life. The world favors Homer because Homer is the main character, and the main character gets the divine attention and the favorable outcomes and the resilience that lets him survive everything. Ned is not the main character. Ned is the good neighbor, the supporting figure, the person whose goodness is real and whose suffering is real and whose reward is the continued opportunity to be good, to practice the virtue, to maintain the faith. It is enough, the show suggests, in the way that the show suggests things without quite saying them. Ned's goodness has its own integrity, independent of reward. The Ned who would stop being good because the goodness was not rewarded was never the Ned the show was interested in. The Ned the show is interested in is the one who continues, who shows up next door, who offers the casserole, who extends the hand even when the hand has been bitten before. That Ned is the show's portrait of what genuine goodness looks like. Not the goodness of the person who is good because it pays. Not the goodness of the person who has never been tested. The goodness of the person who has been tested thoroughly and continues. Ned Flanders continues. In a show full of people who have been shaped by their wounds into something smaller or harder or more defended, Ned has been shaped by his wounds into something that keeps insisting on openness. It has cost him enormously. It will keep costing him. He continues anyway. That is, in the end, the most radical thing in the show. More radical than the radiation theory or the coma theory or the mystery of Burns's immortality. More radical than any of the grand metaphysical questions the show poses. The most radical thing in the show is Ned Flanders, continuing. Expansion. The hours of The Simpsons. When people watch and why. Let us talk about the watching itself, about the specific hours in which people come to The Simpsons and what those hours mean. The Sunday evening slot, where the show has lived for most of its life, has its own particular emotional character. Sunday evening is the end of the weekend and the threshold of the week. It is the hour when the license of the 2 free days is running out and the shape of Monday is becoming visible on the other side of the night. Sunday evening is a liminal space, neither the relaxation of Saturday nor the obligation of Monday, but the anticipation of obligation, the low-grade dread of the week ahead. The Simpsons, broadcast at 8 on Sunday nights, was for a generation the companion of that liminal hour. The comfort before the week resumed, the half hour in which the ordinary American life, the job, the bills, the children, the house, was rendered as comedy and held up for the laughter that made it bearable. That context is inseparable from the show's emotional meaning for the people who grew up with it. The Simpsons is not just a show. It is the feeling of Sunday evening in the years when those Sunday evenings were being lived. It is the couch and the living room and the smell of whatever was being cooked for dinner and the voice of the show folding into the sounds of the house. It is embedded in the texture of a specific kind of American domestic life at a specific historical moment. And for the people who live that life, returning to the show is in some sense returning to that time. To that house, to that couch, and the late night watching. The kind of watching that happens when this video finds you is a different relationship. Not the communal Sunday watching, not the family gathering around the set, but the solitary late-night watching, the show as companion, in the hours when other companionship is unavailable or insufficient. The show as the voice in the dark that knows something, that remembers something, that has been around long enough to have a relationship with the person watching in a way that newer things cannot quite match. This kind of watching is what sleep content understands and works with. The voice in the dark, the familiar material, the long, slow movement through something known. This is what the brain needs when sleep is not arriving, but rest is needed, when the mind needs somewhere to be that is not inside itself, when the company of a voice is the thing that makes the quiet bearable. The dark scenes of The Simpsons are paradoxically ideal for this, not because darkness is restful, it is not in the dramatic sense, but because the darkness of the show is the darkness of honesty rather than the darkness of threat. It is the darkness of true things said gently, of real feelings acknowledged without alarm, of the weight of life described with care rather than with urgency. There is nothing here that will startle you into wakefulness. There is nothing here that will demand your full alert attention. There is only the voice moving through the material, and the material is a show that has known you, in some sense, for most of your life. That has been present at the Sunday evenings and the late nights, and the ordinary days when you needed something that knew the texture of things. This is the particular gift of The Simpsons in the late night. It is not simply entertainment. It is familiar company. It is the voice of something that has been with you so long it has become part of the furniture of your inner life. And so when you hear it in the dark, when the voice moves through the episodes and the scenes and the slow account of what the show was always saying underneath the comedy, there is recognition. The recognition of something that has been around long enough to be trusted. The recognition of familiar rooms, familiar faces, familiar feelings held in familiar forms. The yellow family is still there. In the amber of the archive, in the permanent present tense of the floating timeline, Homer is still on the couch, and Marge is still in the kitchen, and Bart is still on the skateboard, and Lisa is still at the window, and Maggie is still watching, saying nothing, waiting. They are always there. They are always waiting. Come back anytime. Expansion. The music, the tone, the architecture of a feeling. The Simpsons theme is one of the most immediately recognizable pieces of music in the history of American entertainment. From the first notes, the bright brass fanfare, the descending melody, the specific combination of orchestral richness and cartoon playfulness that Danny Elfman assembled when asked to write the theme for a new animated show in 1989. The music announces something. It announces Springfield. It announces the show. It announces, in the peculiar way that themes announce the emotional world they open onto, the specific combination of warmth and irony and sweetness and edge that has always defined the show's personality. And then the couch gag, which varies episode to episode, which has become its own creative tradition within the tradition of the show. The family racing to the couch, the something wrong with the landing, the variation on the familiar that signals. This one is different from the last, and the one before, and all the ones before that. The theme repeats, but the couch gag makes each repetition new. The familiar and the new, braided together. The way the show itself braids the familiar emotional territory with the new episode that explores it. The music throughout the episodes is doing things that most people don't consciously notice and that everyone feels. The comedic stings, the emotional swells, the way the orchestra drops out at exactly the moment that silence will carry the weight better than sound. The way the sad scenes are underscored, not with obvious sad music, but with something quieter, something that sits alongside the feeling rather than amplifying it. And the end credits music. The walk-around, the stroll, the playful coda that plays over the names of the people who made the episode is its own small gift. The credits of The Simpsons have always been part of the experience. Not something to skip, not dead time between the end of the show and whatever comes next, but the show's breathing out after the episode. The exhale after the thing, the architecture of a Simpsons episode is, at its best, a complete emotional structure. It has an opening that establishes the world and the problem, a middle that develops both, a moment of turn where the emotion pivots or the comedy finds its peak, and an ending that brings things to a conclusion that is neither too neat nor too abrupt. The best episodes feel complete in the way that a piece of music feels complete, not because everything is resolved, but because the shape is right. Because the feeling that was opened at the beginning has been fully inhabited and the final note lands in the right key. This is craft. The show at its best is a demonstration of extraordinary craft, of writers who understood the architecture of emotion and comedy simultaneously, who knew how to time a joke and how to time a tear, and how to make the two coexist without either one undermining the other. The dark scenes work because the craft holds them, because the show has, through the preceding minutes, earned the weight they carry, because the Homer who cries about his mother has been established, in previous episodes and in this one, as a person whose emotional life is real and dense and worth taking seriously, because the Bart who weeps at failing the test has been shown, in the 18 minutes before the weeping, as a child who actually tried, because the Lisa who cries when Bergstrom leaves has been given, in the episodes that built her, the full context of what his departure means. The craft is the container. Without it, the emotion would be melodrama, feeling imposed from outside, asked for rather than earned. With it, the emotion arrives naturally, at the pace the episode has set, in the form the episode has prepared for it. That is the thing about The Simpsons that is hardest to explain to someone who has not watched it carefully. How much work goes into the moments that feel effortless. The precision behind the apparent looseness. The construction behind the apparent spontaneity. The show looks like a cartoon that happens to be funny and occasionally moving. It is actually one of the most carefully crafted pieces of popular entertainment in the history of the medium. And the dark scenes are where the craft is most visible to anyone who is paying attention. Because the dark scenes are the hardest things to do. Comedy has its own grammar, its own reliable mechanisms. Emotion, in the middle of comedy, without the support of a genre designed to carry it. Emotion, in that context, requires everything the craft has to offer. The Simpsons offered it, consistently, for 36 years, in the episodes that mattered, and in many of the episodes that seemed to matter less, until you looked back and found that they had mattered more than you knew. The craft holds the feeling holds the truth. The truth holds across the years, in the episodes, in the archive, in the late-night watching when you need something that knows you and carries your weight gently for a little while. That is what we have been walking through tonight. The craft and the feeling and the truth. All three. All at once. In Springfield. In the yellow town in the nowhere state. Still here. Still present. Still going. Expansion. 36 seasons of Sunday evenings. What we were watching when we thought we were just watching TV. There is a particular experience that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not had it. The experience of watching a show for so many years that it becomes indistinguishable from your own memory. The episodes of The Simpsons that aired in the early 1990s are not simply television programs for the people who watched them as children. They are the texture of those years. They are the color of Saturday morning and Sunday evening and sick days home from school. They are wrapped around specific memories, the way wallpaper is wrapped around a room. You stop seeing the wallpaper, but it shapes your experience of everything that happens inside it. People who grew up watching The Simpsons carry the show in a way that is different from the way you carry a book you loved, or a film that moved you. Those things you hold at a slight distance with the awareness that they are objects separate from yourself. The Simpsons is more internal than that for the people who absorbed it young enough. It is part of the furniture of the self. This is why the analysis of the show, why the theories and the dark readings and the attention to what the show was doing underneath the surface can feel, to the people who know the show most intimately, both illuminating and slightly unsettling. To look carefully at The Simpsons is to look carefully at something that is inside you. To find the dark seams and the buried meanings is to find them not just in a television program, but in the material of your own memories, your own formative years, the years when you were becoming the person you became. The person you became was watching The Simpsons while they became. This is not causation. The show did not make you who you are in any simple sense. But it was present. It was background. It was the light in the room while other things were happening. And light shapes everything it touches, even when, especially when, you are not watching the light but watching what the light illuminates. What was the show illuminating in those years as you watched? It was illuminating ordinary American family life in all its warmth and dysfunction, its love and its failure, its specific quality of trying hard and falling short and trying again. It was illuminating the working class in a way that honored them without romanticizing them. It was illuminating the town, the institutional fabric of American community, the school and the church and the police and the government, with an eye that was simultaneously affectionate and unflinching. And it was illuminating, in the dark scenes we have been walking through, the interior lives of the people inside these structures. Homer at the kitchen window, Marge in the theater, Bart at the test, Lisa at the window. All of them, the full family, in the full complexity of what they are and what they carry, and what the life they are living costs them and gives them. The show illuminated this, and you watched. And somewhere in the watching, the things it illuminated became part of the furniture of what you knew. Not as explicit knowledge, you were not sitting there thinking about the economics of working-class America or the labor of the domestic, but as felt understanding. As the kind of knowledge that lives in the body rather than the mind, that does not need to be retrieved consciously because it is already present in how you see things. The Simpsons shaped how a generation sees ordinary life. It gave them a vocabulary, not of words but of images and feelings and recognitions, for the texture of the life around them, for the Homerness of the men in their lives, and the Margeness of the women, and the Bartness of the troubled children, and the Lisaness of the two awake ones. It gave them a frame for the Burnsness of power, and the Nedness of virtue, and the Springfieldness of every ordinary American town that has its cracked cooling towers and its three-eyed fish, and its collective agreement to keep going. That is a form of education, the informal education of art, which is the deepest kind, the kind that does not announce itself as education, but that shapes understanding from the inside. The dark scenes of The Simpsons were part of this education. They taught, without teaching, the things that cannot be taught directly, that love is insufficient and essential simultaneously, that effort does not guarantee outcome, that the strong person carries a cost the people around them rarely see, that genius in a small place is a form of loneliness, that goodness is not always rewarded, and that this is a fact to be lived with rather than a problem to be solved. These are adult truths. The show delivered them to children, wrapped in comedy, delivered through animation, embedded in the Sunday evening light. And the children absorbed them and grew up and found that the truths were still there. More legible now, more clearly labeled, but the same truths they had been carrying since the years when they were just the feeling inside a funny cartoon. This is why, returning to the show as adults, so many people find something they did not fully expect. The sense of having always known. The dark scenes land not as revelations, but as confirmations. Yes. This. The thing I felt but did not have words for. The shape of the thing I knew but could not see clearly until now. The show prepared you for this. It gave you the feeling before it gave you the words. And now, in the dark of a late night, the voice is giving you the words to the feeling that was always there, that the show installed in you years ago in the living room of a house that may no longer exist. There is a kind of homecoming in this. The feeling of arriving at something you left a long time ago and finding it still there, still exactly what it was. Waiting. Springfield waits, the show waits, the archive waits, and when you need it, at whatever hour, in whatever quiet, it is there. Expansion. The light that comes after. What the dark scenes are for we have been in the dark for a while now. Not oppressively, not the dark of suffering or the dark of despair, but the dark of honesty. The honest dark that comes when you stop pretending things are simpler than they are and simply look at what is there without the protection of the joke. We have looked at Homer's wounds and Marge's labor and Bart's armor and Lisa's isolation. We have looked at Burns's emptiness and Ned's prison and the side characters' buried losses. We have looked at death and grief and the episodes that made adults cry without warning, and the episodes that said true things about marriage and love and the persistence of the ordinary. This is worth asking. Why? Why does it matter to look at the dark parts of a show we love? Why not simply enjoy the comedy, let the warmth be warm, and pass through the years of the show without examining the shadows? The answer is that the dark parts are where the love is. Not the only place the love lives. The comedy is also love. the love of craft, the love of the audience, the love of the characters themselves expressed in the absurdist celebration of what they are. The warmth is love. The couch gag is love. The theme song is love. But the dark parts are where the love is at its most real, most tested, most serious. When the show looked at Homer under the stars and held the shot, it was loving him. Not protecting him, not saving him from the moment, not offering him the joke that would make the night smaller and more manageable. Loving him. Sitting with him in the thing that was too large for comfort. Being present at the full size of his grief. That is what love does at its best. It sits with you in the thing that is too large for comfort. It does not minimize or manage or fix. It is present at the full size of the thing in the full duration of the feeling, until the feeling has had its time and becomes something else. The dark scenes of The Simpsons are acts of love toward its characters and through its characters toward the audience. They are the show saying, I see this in you, in the person watching, in the human condition that I have been animating for 36 years. I see the Homer grief and the Marge labor and the Bart armor and the Lisa isolation. I see all of it, and I am sitting with it. Not because I have solutions, but because the sitting is the thing. The being present is the thing. When you watch the dark scenes, when you let them reach you, when you let the voice carry them into the quiet room, you are participating in this. You are receiving the love that is in them. The specific love of a piece of art that took the trouble to see something real and render it honestly and offer it to anyone who needed it. You may have needed it at 3 in the morning when you first heard this voice. You may have needed it last week or last year or a long time ago when the weight was heavier than it is now. You may need it now, in this particular quiet, for reasons that are yours and that you do not need to explain. The show is there, the voice is here, the archive holds everything. And the dark scenes, the honest ones, the ones that loved their characters enough to let them be sad in public, those are for you. They were always for you. They were made by people who understood that the comedy was not enough on its own, that the warmth required the honest dark to be real warmth rather than false reassurance. They put the dark in the comedy, and the dark made the comedy true. And the truth is what has kept the show alive in the hearts of the people who watch it for 36 years, who return to it at 3 in the morning, who find in it not just entertainment, but something closer to companionship, closer to the feeling of being known. You are known. Whatever you are carrying tonight, it is the kind of thing the show has seen, the kind of thing Homer has carried, or Marge, or Bart in his guarded way, or Lisa in her sleepless way. The kind of thing Springfield carries in its collective, imperfect, ongoing life. You are not carrying it in isolation. The show has been here, has seen it, has been honest about it for longer than almost anything else in the culture. Rest in that. Let the knowing be enough for now. Let the weight be seen. And when morning comes, or when sleep comes, or whenever the dark gives way, the archive will still be there. Springfield will still be there, and so will you. Expansion. The golden seasons and what made them gold. There is a period in the show's history that fans speak of the way they speak of almost nothing else in television. With the specific reverence of people who believe they witnessed something that will not come again. Seasons 2 through 8, roughly. The Golden Age. The period when the show was firing on every cylinder, when the comedy and the emotion and the satire and the character work were all happening simultaneously at the highest possible level, when every Sunday brought a new episode that somehow managed to be funnier and sadder and truer than what had come before. What made those seasons gold? Part of it was the writer's room, the specific collection of people who were in the room in those years, many of them Harvard graduates, many of them with backgrounds in fields other than television, most of them young and hungry and possessed of both genuine comedic intelligence and genuine emotional intelligence, created a culture of quality that was rare in network television and maybe unreplicable. They pushed each other. They killed the jokes that were not the best possible jokes. They demanded that every episode be about something beyond its premise, that the comedy serve the character and the character serve the truth. Part of it was the freedom. In the early years, before the show became a cultural phenomenon and therefore a franchise that needed to be protected, the writers had unusual latitude to try things, to go dark, to take risks with the format and the characters that a more commercially cautious production would have avoided. The radiation theory, the coma theory, the who shot Burns mystery, the Armin Tamzarian storyline. These were not the products of a committee optimizing for the broadest possible audience. They were the products of a room full of people who were genuinely interested in what they were making, who were willing to let the show be strange and dark and uncomfortable when the material demanded it. And part of it was the characters themselves, at the peak of their definition. In those early seasons, every character was still finding themselves, still being discovered, still surprising the writers as much as the audience. Homer was becoming Homer in real time. Marge was becoming Marge. The Springfield of the golden seasons has a quality of aliveness, of characters who exist just on the other side of the frame, who are doing things even when the camera is not on them. That later seasons, for all their technical polish, have not fully maintained. The dark scenes of the golden seasons have a quality that is slightly different from the dark scenes of later seasons. Not better necessarily. The show produced remarkable things late in its run, surprising things, moments of honesty that arrived when you had stopped expecting them. But different. More raw, somehow. More willing to be uncomfortable without immediately providing relief. Homer under the stars. Bart weeping in the classroom. Lisa hearing that Bergstrom is gone and reaching for the note he left her. These are golden season dark scenes, and they have the quality of something that was made without a net, without the certainty of how the audience would receive it, without the assurance that the show was established enough to absorb the risk of going somewhere difficult. They were made in the years when the show was still proving itself, and the proof arrived in those moments, in the willingness to sit in difficulty, to hold the camera on a feeling for longer than was comfortable, to trust the audience to come with them into the dark and to find in the dark the thing they needed. The gold of the golden seasons is the gold of that trust, given and received, the show trusting its audience, the audience trusting the show. The contract between them built in those years and honored again and again across the run of the show and across the life of the viewer. It is still honored. You are here, after all, in the dark, listening. The trust is still intact. Expansion. What the couch means. We have moved through the whole show tonight, through the characters and the episodes and the theories and the craft and the meaning and the ways the dark scenes earned the right to be dark. But we have not fully stopped at the couch. The couch is the center of the show. Literally. It is the center of the living room where the family lands at the end of every opening credits sequence. It is where the couch gag happens, which is the show's weekly declaration that even the most familiar things can be surprising, if you approach them with enough imagination. And it is symbolically the center of everything the show cares about. The couch is where families gather, where the day ends, where the television is watched and the food is eaten and the arguments happen and the silences are held, where children fall asleep against parents and are carried to bed, where the news arrives and the game is watched, and the long, ordinary evenings of domestic life play out in the light of the screen. The Simpsons, a show broadcast on television, is watched on couches. Its entire premise, the American family in front of the television, mirrors the conditions of its reception. The show watches a family watching television. The audience watches by watching television. The recursion is not accidental. The show has always known that it is being watched by people who are doing exactly what the people in the show are doing. Sitting, watching, being, in their own domestic spaces, The Simpsons. This is the intimacy of it. This is why the couch functions as the central image rather than something more conventionally dramatic or cinematic. The couch is where real Americans are when they watch television. The couch is us. Homer landing on the couch is Homer arriving. Coming home. The chaos of the opening credits, the wild race from school and work and wherever the characters have been, resolves into the couch, into the family, into the center. Whatever has happened, wherever they have been, the family gathers here. The couch holds them. The television illuminates them. They are, for this moment, exactly where they should be. That is the show's deepest structural promise. Not that everything will be okay, but the dark scenes make clear that everything will not always be okay, but that the family will gather, that Homer will come home, that the couch will receive them, that the light from the screen will fall on all of them equally, yellow and imperfect and present. This promise is kept at the end of every episode. Whatever happened, whatever disasters and discoveries and dark moments the episode contained, the family is still there. On the couch. Together. In the light. The couch is the show's answer to all its dark scenes. Not a refutation. The darkness was real, the feelings were real, the losses and griefs and failures were real. But a context. The context in which all the difficult things are held. The warmth of the family that continues. The company of the people you love. The light. It is enough. It has always been enough. And now, in the quiet of this particular night or morning or whatever hour has found you here, let that image be the last one. The couch, the family, the light, Homer arriving, Marge already there, Bart and Lisa piling on from their ends, Maggie somewhere in the middle, watching, saying nothing, seeing everything. The couch gag plays. Something unexpected happens, something that has never happened before, and the family laughs. And then the show begins. It is always beginning. Somewhere in Springfield, the show is always beginning, and you are always welcome there. Close your eyes. Breathe. The couch is there, the light is on. Go home. Closing passage. The last walk down Evergreen Terrace. Evergreen Terrace is quiet at this hour. The street is empty, the way streets are empty at the hour you are most likely to be listening to this. After midnight, before dawn, in the hinge between one day and the next when the world has paused and even the most restless places are still. The houses are dark, mostly. A light here and there in an upstairs window where someone else is awake, for reasons of their own, in their own particular quiet. Number 742 is at the end of the block. The yellow house, slightly run down in the specific way that the houses of people who mean well and fall short, tend to be run down. The maintenance that keeps getting deferred, the project that stays a project, the hedge that grows and grows because there is always something else that needs doing first. The house is imperfect in the way that lived-in things are imperfect. It has the imperfection of use. Inside, Homer is asleep. On the couch, probably. He falls asleep on the couch more nights than Marge can count, and she has stopped trying to count, and she has more or less made her peace with it, because the accounting of Homer's minor domestic failures was never going to be a sustainable project. And love, in its practical form, often looks like selective attention. She counts the things worth counting. The couch is not worth counting. He sleeps with his mouth slightly open and his enormous chest rising and falling in the slow, reliable rhythm of a man who is, in this particular moment, completely at peace. The day is over. The disasters and the recoveries and the meals and the children have all resolved into the couch and the peace of the body at rest. Homer, asleep, is purely himself. There is no performance in it and no effort, no management. Just the body doing what bodies do when they have been given permission to stop. Marge is upstairs, in their bed, in the specific center of the bed that she occupies when Homer is not in it. Not the middle of the mattress, but the center as she understands it, which is slightly to the side that is hers. The shape she has been sleeping in for the length of this marriage. The groove of her own long rest. She is asleep too, or nearly, in the soft, shallow half-sleep that mothers sleep, available to the sounds of the house, responsive to whatever might require her. Her hair is down. Without the construction of the day, she is simply herself. The Marge underneath the Marge, resting. In Bart's room, the evidence of the day's chaos has settled into something that is almost peaceful. The skateboard by the door, the comics scattered on the floor, the window slightly open to the night air. Bart is asleep face down, one arm hanging off the bed, the posture of a child who fell into sleep rather than choosing it, who was tired enough that the falling happened before the choosing could. His face, in sleep, has the face of a younger child, the armor down, the bravado absent, just the boy who tried and felt and covers it all so carefully in the hours when the world is watching. In Lisa's room, the saxophone is on its stand by the window. The window is open. The night air moves through it gently. Lisa is asleep with a book open on the pillow beside her face. The page she was reading when the sleep arrived. The last sentence she read still present somewhere in the dream she is moving through. She sleeps with the focused inward expression of a person who is still thinking even in sleep, still processing, still working through something that the waking hours could not quite resolve. Even in sleep, Lisa is not quite finished. And in Maggie's room, in the crib with the mobile above it that turns slowly in the draft from the hallway, Maggie is awake. She is often awake at this hour. No one knows this. The family sleeps, and Maggie is awake in the dark of her room, watching the mobile turn and watching the shadows move and watching, as she always watches with the patient, complete attention that is her defining gift. She is watching the night. She is watching the house. She is watching with the enormous, uncanny intelligence that lives behind her eyes, the specific, beautiful, imperfect, ordinary life that she has been given. The parents and the siblings and the dog and the house and the neighborhood and the town and everything that lies beyond the town, which she can sense even if she cannot yet reach it. She is watching all of it. She says nothing. She never says anything. But in the dark of her room, with the mobile turning slowly and the house breathing around her, something in her expression suggests that she understands, that she has understood for a long time, that the watching and the silence and the patience are not waiting to be filled, but are themselves full, full of knowing, full of the accumulated understanding of a mind that has been taking everything in since the beginning. She will speak someday, or she will not. Either way, she knows. And knowing in the end is enough. The house breathes. The street is quiet. The town is still. Springfield, the impossible town in the nowhere state, the yellow place that is everywhere and belongs to everyone, is at rest. The plant is there on the horizon. The cracked cooling towers against the sky, the pale glow of the facilities, the lights that are always on. It is always there. It has always been there. It will keep being there through all the nights and all the years, the great improbable engine at the center of everything. But tonight it is quiet. Tonight it is just a shape against the sky. Tonight it is not the center of anything that matters. Tonight what matters is the house, the sleeping family, the four-fingered hands curled in rest, the yellow faces slack and open, the dog at the foot of the bed, the cat somewhere that the dog cannot see. The love that holds them, imperfect, persistent, daily renewed in ways so small they barely register as renewal, doing its quiet work. The love that has held them for 36 years, through every season, every episode, every Sunday evening, every late night when someone who needed them found them in the archive, in the dark, in the glow of the screen. The love does not announce itself. It does not require acknowledgement. It simply continues. In the house on Evergreen Terrace, in the town that does not age, in the permanent present tense, where the family is always exactly where they are, and always exactly who they are, and always, always home. This is where we have been tonight. This is where we end. In the quiet of number 742, in the still of the street, in the specific blue dark of this hour that belongs to no day and no night, but to the space between them where rest lives. You have been here with us for the full length of it, through the dark and the difficult and the honest things that the show was always saying, and that a voice in the dark can sometimes say more clearly than the comedy could. You have been good company. The archive is there when you need it. The episodes are waiting. The characters are exactly where you left them and exactly where they will be when you return. Unchanged, permanent, present in the specific way that only the things we truly love are present. Homer will come home. Marge will be there. Bart will ride the skateboard down the hall. Lisa will play the saxophone at the window, and the music will reach wherever music reaches when there is nothing stopping it. And Maggie will watch. She always watches. Rest now. You have been watching too. That is enough. That is more than enough. Good night from Springfield. Good night from the family that never ages, in the town that never changes, in the show that never ends. Good night from the couch and the kitchen and the plant and the bar and the school and all the places that add up to the most famous fictional town in the history of American television. Good night from the dark underneath the comedy, where the real things live. Good night from everyone who made it and everyone who watched it and everyone who found in it something they needed. Good night.